Hello again, friends! And you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here on this beautiful Tuesday, late afternoon, early evening, perhaps morning, perhaps middle of the night if you are in Hawaii the night before. There's so many different options. Who knows when this will emerge from the crypt of Cornette? But right now we have questions sent in by you and reviews and all sorts of other stuff that we're going to do right here at the top of the show. I'm your host, the great Bryan Last. I'll be talking less as the show goes on, and here he is, the star of the show, Mr. Jim Cornette.
We can only hope that that's the end of you for the episode. You've done your part up front, gotten it out of the way. We've moved past it now. Good heavens. A meandering version of your normal, overly wordy introduction.
Yeah, meandering intro, yeah.
I'm all right now, but this morning I was in rough shape. I'm still waiting. And by the way, are you sure that you're recording this? Is this going on some type of recording device? We're not just doing this and it's going to be a rib, right? Because this will be the first productive thing I've done today.
We are indeed recording right now.
You got the minions over there in the Arcadian Vanguard network. They got the backup on the backup just in case. I tell you, I got up this morning. I opened the doorknob fell off. I picked up my suitcase, the handle fell off. I'm afraid to take a piss. It's been one of those days. And since I spoke to you last on the experience, just a few days ago, a few short, brief days ago, it seems like, I got industrious over the weekend, Bryan, and the Cornette's Collectibles customers still awaiting their figures. So many have gone out. So many have arrived. They're all over Twitter, twatting pictures of the figures as requested to prove to people that these are actually going out by the hundreds. So I got real ambitious. I packed up another 125 boxes over the weekend, over Saturday and Sunday. And I signed them, and I packed them, and I put the labels on them, and I loaded them into Black Beauty, ready for my Monday morning appointment. I get over there this morning. I wheel the first dolly load in the door, and the line is backed up, and I see there's John by himself. Uh-oh, this could be bad. I've got an appointment with lovely Bree. And I should mention also that they've lost some of the personnel this week because they've been not forced to go. They've been instructed to go to another station because the people over there are quarantined and blah, blah, blah. It's a domino effect, Bryan. You understand what I'm saying? So we're shorthanded as it is. And I've mentioned John's a lovely man, a big Beatles collector, great to talk to about music trivia, about as slow as molasses in January. And what would take Bree, I've timed it, I've compared, he's 2.5 times longer than Bree on anything. So I've got an hour's worth for Bree. So but John sees me as I roll in, and he says, well, Bree's going to be here, but she's called in. She's stuck on the interstate in a wreck. Don't know how long. You're the only, yeah, I'm the only one here right now. Oh, shit. Okay. Can I do this? I'm going to run out. I'm going to run to the grocery store because, and I believe I've mentioned this to you, Bryan, also in the past. This grocery delivery thing, it comes with catches, such as, number one, they will substitute shit for you if they do not have the specific thing that you asked for. Now, in some cases, that would not be a major thing, but some people's version of substitution is you want Coke. They don't have Coke, so they give you orange Coke with peanut butter flavor. That's not a one-for-one substitution. As well, if you say we don't want any substitutions, and when they bring you your shit, but you don't have the shit they didn't have, then you're in the same position you were before they brought the shit. So you got to go out and get the shit. So I was going out to get the shit that Stace can't carry because she's doing better and feeling better, up and around better, but she's not supposed to bend and lift all this stuff. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to run over there, and then I'm going to run back and see if Bree's here and ship part of this stuff, because I'm battling the clock against the 10 o'clock passport appointments, in which case that will take a clerk, in which case I will create a riot if I've got the other one for an hour. So I run over to the grocery store, and it's packed, of course, and people sniffing and snorting everywhere. So I run and just get the couple of things that I've got to get. And then I run back over to the post office. Oh, having had to stop to get gas because I was almost out, because I'm out of the habit of getting gas, since I only put 46 miles on the truck last month. Then I go run back by the post office, and the line is still out the door, which indicates that either Bree is not there yet or she has not fought through John's backlog, in which case the passport appointments are going to be starting shortly, and I'm screwed. So I rush back home because now it looks like it's going to rain. And I believe that I had seen the radar that didn't indicate that it was going to rain, and I know the Monroe brothers are coming. So I get here, and it's not 10 minutes later that here come the Monroes driving up in the rain. It's rained. They're here, by the way, since the experience, they've put in 60 feet of that PVC drain pipe from my back drain all the way into the French drain. You can run a fire hose through this fucking thing. But they haven't covered it all up yet. That's what they were going to do, and then address the new bubbling natural springs in my backyard. But now it's pouring rain. So they hop in the garage, and Alf Monroe, who's the head of the crew, he says, I want to see what's going on with that other place that the water's popping up. So he gets an umbrella. He looked like Mary Poppins on top and Joe Dirt on the bottom. And he takes off in the pouring rain back into the backyard, and he takes video of this water shooting up out of the ground and then running about 10 or 12 feet and then dropping into that cave. And he's trying to figure out what they're going to do. But, of course, now the rain is coming down even harder. They can't even drive the truck back there. They'll get mired down in the mud. And so the day appears to be a bust. And he comes back and shows me the video on his phone, and then he shows me the weather radar, which indicates that there is absolutely no rain in our vicinity. And then they get in the truck, and they turn around, and they leave. And guess what happened, Brian? Just a scant 15 minutes or so after they left.
Rain.
No, it quit raining. It stopped raining, and I'm looking out the window right now, and I'm seeing blue skies and white fluffy clouds. But the Monroe brothers are already back to Hooterville. They're almost to Pixley by this point. So and then I was scheduled to record a program today, but someone didn't do all their due diligence in time, all the preparation for same aforesaid recording, and such I was left twiddling Mr. Johnson for low on to an hour before finally, I'm able to do something productive here on this fine day. But I will mention that the figures are still in Black Beauty and will be headed out tomorrow, along with another batch of stuff that will be going out Wednesday now, and et cetera, et cetera. We're still shipping 3 days, the rest of the week, just 3 different days. And I'm happy to announce that by the time that I finish emptying my truck, whenever that may be, everybody that's ordered a 2-pack of figures domestically, everybody that's ordered a single figure domestically, all your stuff is either there or will be in the mail, and we are working this, the royal we, Brian, I am working the rest of this week and this weekend on the figures with other items, which should be all winging their way to you domestically by a week from Wednesday, which will be what, May the 12th-ish or thereabouts.
The 12th.
There you see. And I'm quick like that too. And then we're starting on you fine folks that ordered internationally, including one from, I think, Bangladesh. I'm not sure. I've never seen an address like this in my life. I was reviewing those the other day. But anyway, so we're getting down to the nub on it. I would say within the next 2.5 weeks, maybe 3, depending on how long those internationals take. As we know, there is extra paperwork involved in making sure the government knows that we're not trying to conspire against them. 3 weeks, I heard a long national nightmare will be over and all the figures will be winging their way to the fine customers that they are intended for, Brian. So we can send up almost a sigh of relief and a cheer, hip, hip, hoorah. I've never been so tired at looking at myself than I have every time I look down upon my countenance, my younger face, when I sign those figures.
So you're more of a hip, hip, hoorah guy than hip, hip, hooray?
I was joshing. I was mispronouncing it on purpose for comedic effect.
Very good.
Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah.
All right, well.
Attaboy, Luther! Hey, shout out Svengoolie, our friend Svengoolie. Aired The Ghost and Mr. Chicken this past weekend.
No, I missed it. Oh, God damn it.
And well, I mean, you've got to have the DVD on your shelf in your collection, along with Citizen Kane and Gone with the Wind, The Ghost of Mr. Chicken. But it's nice to see Sven's cut-ins and bits and everything. And who did the theme music? Bryan last for The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, the soundtrack.
I never even heard of The Ghost of Mr. Chicken until you started quoting it on the show a few years ago. So I've never actually seen it, but I have an idea of what it is. Who did the soundtrack? Mid-60s. Henry Mancini.
No. Henry Mancini, songs from A Ghost of Mr. Chicken. That would have been a million seller. Fucking hell. Well, I'll go into this email later on, but anyway, no, Vic Mizzy, the incredibly talented and legendary 60s TV theme show music composer. He did Green Acres. His stuff had all the sound effects and the cute little fucking bells and whistles and things. And he did creative stuff with. It was more like an updated Spike Jones and the City Slickers type of music. Vic Mizzy, very whimsical and comedic music. Soundtrack for our lives in the 60s.
Someone needs to do the Henry Mancini cut now. How different that whole film would be. With Henry Mancini.
Well, he would. What could he do with the organ solo in the organ loft, where suddenly the ghost starts playing the organ with the keys stained with Mrs. Simmons' blood, and they used Bon Ami.
It's like actually
it was kind of like that.
All right, well.
Very frightening music when you're 6 years old.
Very frightening to hear it in my headset here.
Anyway, well, so nevertheless, we got off on a sidetrack about soundtracks there, but now we're back on track, and the action figures are on track to be in the hands of the customers very soon, because I was getting nervous, Brian, seeing that mound, that stack of orders, and all those people to whom I owe merchandise, and I was thinking, if I don't hurry up and fill these, I can't imagine what's going to happen to my credit score. Because some way or another, they've got to be intertwined, because that was the segue that I came up with. And folks, did you know that the average American has 97 points that they could add to their credit score, but have no idea how to get them? Well, the fine folks at Scoremaster is the new credit science that super boosts your credit score. Straps a rocket to its ass. Forget about raising your score a couple of points. That's lame. That's bullshit. The average Scoremaster user raises their credit score 61 points in 20 days or less. And if you go to get a car loan with a score in the high fives, mid sixes, whatever, if you went to Scoremaster first, raise your credit score just the average 61 points, then you could have saved $9,000 on the car loan. On a home loan, doing the same thing before you get a home loan, almost $100,000 over the life of your loan. And of course, if you run a business, you know you got to have credit, because the only way that you can successfully get money from people is if you can prove that you don't need it. So super boost your credit score with ScoreMaster. Go to scoremaster.com/JCE. That way they'll know you're in with us and they'll treat you better. Scoremaster.com/JCE, and put yourself in control of your finances instead of these evil, greedy, avaricious banks.
All right. Well, of course, this, Jim, being the drive-through.
Yeah, it's your show.
My show. We have lots of questions.
What are we supposed to be doing here?
Well, we have lots of questions I've been curating over here that have been sent in.
Curating?
Trying to find some nice ones.
Then do you can them like preserves after you curate them?
I do not, currently. But we have lots of questions.
Well, and get to some of them. Lay the smackdown on me, baby.
On that topic, I mentioned to you the other day, off air, of course, that there was an interest that I was seeing in a lot of the listeners about Smackdown, a match between Roman Reigns and Daniel Bryan, with a stipulation that I believe if Daniel Bryan lost, he had to leave SmackDown forever. A blessing, some may call that. But I mentioned to you that a lot of people wanted to potentially see that, and of course, naturally wanted to hear your thoughts on it. And did you
go ahead? Don't quit beating around the bush. Just say exactly what you mean. Some people were saying, "Hey, this might actually be a decent fucking wrestling match, and something worth watching." What'll Jim think about it? Because everybody was holding out hope that this might actually be worth watching. So don't sugarcoat things. Go ahead and say what you mean.
That's exactly it. There was going to be a match that had potential to be good and worth your time on a 2-hour wrestling show. There was supposed to be a match worth your time.
Yes, and I will... Actually, here's the thing. I went over and above the request that you made of me, and since I recorded the whole show, I said, you know what? I'm going to start zipping through this, and when something that I believe might interest me happens, I will slow down and watch it, right? Even before we get to the big match.
Oh, this is news to me, because I didn't do that at all.
No,
so I didn't
don't worry, because it ain't going to take me long to tell you what you missed.
Okay.
Well, they opened it with an interview with Bianca Belair that Bobby Roode and Dolph Ziggler came out and interrupted, but just as I slowed it down because I'd like to see Bobby Roode and Dolph Ziggler, here came the Street Profits, and okay, this is going to be some underneath bullshit, and here came Bayley, and the girls got in a fight, and then the guys got in a fight, and they went to a break. And when they came back from the break, they had a 6-person tag. And then Daniel Bryan did a promo, and I stopped and watched that. And he speaks well, and I felt that it was scripted and that he was saying what they had for him to say, but I didn't see any of the passion or emotion that you sometimes get from Daniel Bryan when he's actually saying something that he wants to say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then Seth Rollins did a promo wearing one glove, but it's not like a Michael Jackson spangly glove. It's like a goddamn big leather winter glove for when you're cleaning off your windshield. And he did a scripted interview where they had a bunch of people talking about who they were picking to win. He picked Daniel Bryan. I stopped giving a fuck a few of these in. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler and Reggie did a promo that was very scripted. And then their opposing team, Tamina and Natalya, came in and a fight broke out, and Reggie just stood there and watched his girls get beat up. It didn't do anything except checked on them afterwards. And then they had a tag team match with Tamina and Natalya versus Nia and Shayna, or Nia and Shayna, whatever the fuck. There's a lot of here. And I would be lying if I said I watched this, even for the potential comedic value. However, Tamina won with the Superfly splash off the top rope if Superfly was a drunk falling off a curb.
Oh, come on.
Shit, no. No. Obviously, and it would be great. It would be a wonderful thing if Jimmy Snuka was so over and that move was so over, and she's the family, and if she could get up there and do it like he did it and spring off, and it was great. But no, they're having her do it because that's his thing. She wasn't real sure of herself when she got up there, and then when she came off, it was feet first, and kind of the rest followed. Ray and Dominic Mysterio did a promo, and my God, poor Dominic. When you hear people recite scripted lines they've been given with no emotion, it's bad. But when you hear them recite scripted lines while trying to sound cheerful and excited about something, but they're obviously not because they're scared to death they're going to fuck this interview up. They're talking about being a father and son tag team. And it was, you could see right through it. As I was fast forwarding, I just noticed Pat McAfee's doing color. We'll get to that when I actually listen to it. They played a video of Alistair Black, and now he's the guy that they wheeled out, strapped down to the thing, or he lifted from the stage, strapped to the thing, kind of a Hannibal Lecter-ish thing, and he was all tattooed, and he was a weirdo. Now he's wearing glasses, reading from a book of ancient sorcery, speaking like a professor, and telling some kind of weird story including animation that they've done for it that sounded like one of those independent horror films where you don't actually know what you're supposed to be scared of, but they're talking spooky. Then they had a rematch due to unpopular demand of Apollo Crews and Big E, but they did the gimmick match first, and then they had a rematch with just a match. And of course, Apollo has what was his name? Dabney Coleman.
Coleman, yes.
Dabney Coleman. He used to be Dabney Coleman, and now he's General ZZ or General Jaja. So anyway, General Jaja's out there. So I zipped through to where he got involved. So he interferes in the match, but here comes Kevin Owens. And Lord God, the big guy is green as a pepper tree. You can tell he's awkward and etc. But Steen can work, but he was just all over him with punches that I don't know whether he could have sold him if he knew how to sell them. It was just awkward. And then also Owens is all up over him, but then Zayn came in and saved the Giant, who was backed in the corner getting his shit punched out of him by Owens, and Zayn comes in and stops Owens, and they beat up Owens and Big E, and then suddenly Owens and Big E were just gone. They left. They went away somewhere, and Zayn was trying to suck up to Cruz and Jaja in the ring because he's not really connected with them. He was just mad at Owens or whatever the fuck, so he stooges for them, and then old Commander ZZ hits Zayn with a rotten-looking throat punch that he had to sell like he'd been poleaxed in the Adam's apple with a goddamn pole vault pole. So this was kind of awkward all the way around. But as the Giant, I mean, they weren't. He didn't go down, but he'd shove them and they'd come right back, and then somebody would get them from behind or whatever. Is the only way the Giant got an advantage. I didn't understand that whole thing. Anyway, that's probably where you came in if you started with Heyman's interview back in the locker room.
I didn't see Heyman's promo or the package. Oh! I fast-forwarded through that in the packages.
No! Oh, now I must call foul. You missed the Heyman promo. That actually was the best part of the show, be quite honest, because, I mean, I'm not going to knock Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns' match and everything, but it's just so refreshing to hear somebody cut a fucking promo, a manager cut a promo for his guy that puts over the other guy. And it was a master class. Everybody else is in a fucking daycare center on this entire program, and Heyman is a college professor. He was leagues above anybody speaking on this program in any capacity. And it was it was obviously his own, even if he didn't come up with it on the spot, he did it. It was his. And it was fucking fabulous. That's the best promo I've seen on a fucking wrestling show that I can remember, actually. When's the last time I really praised a promo? You can't remember, can you?
Maybe Pat McAfee? Maybe?
Well, yeah, maybe on one of those NXT programs where they were bilking. They were bilking up. They were milking his match or whatever. But point is, it was fucking phenomenal. He starts out where you believe he's mocking and fed up with hearing about Daniel Bryan and mocking him. But the more that he goes and the more that he talks and the more incidents that he raises, I couldn't do it. That's a Heyman promo. I wouldn't try to do Paul's promo. He probably shouldn't try to do a few of mine, but I wouldn't try this one. But he was building up to the more that he talked, the more he worked himself up. And then he realized at the end that by saying what he wanted to say, he's just buried his own guy and created doubt in people's mind. And then he's, but then he still brings it fucking back to where he wanted it to be, which was he'd been doing yes, yes, yes the whole time. But finally he brings it back to, is Daniel Bryan going to win? No. And it was and one of the girl interviewers, Karen, whatever her name is, I don't care. They were smart enough. She just said, here's Paul Heyman, and stood there, and then they didn't shoot her anymore, really. They just shot him. So it was a great fucking promo.
He really is like a 2021 version of the managers in the Northeast in the 70s, in that he delivers excellent promos, and then they didn't stay at ringside. They came back to the locker room. He stays at ringside, but he doesn't really get involved. That's not his thing. He's not like a Southern manager swinging a tennis racket or getting people to want to murder you. No, I mean, it was a different style of manager, the New York style of manager versus a Southern style manager. And Heyman is the natural extension of Albano, Blassie, and the Wizard in that regard.
Yeah, and the fact that they all had gimmicks, but they were all, I guess for lack of a better, they were all personalities as people, even though they had, gimmick. He doesn't have a wild gimmick like the Grand Wizard, or he doesn't dress flashy like Blassie, or he's not a lunatic like Albano, but he is the modern update of that also, in that those guys, especially at the time and in that atmosphere, were the cutting edge promos to just piss people off. But he's a completely different kind of personality, because that's Paul. He just happens to be a personality. I don't know how else to, because you can't call him a character, because he's not playing a character. That's the antithesis of what I'm saying. That's Paul if Paul just is in that mood, right? He can also be nice. He can be whatever, but it's not method acting here. How can I say that? It's not a stretch. He sounds just like Paul. He sounds, except he's obviously talking about a work situation. But he's still a person. I mean, who else looks like that and talks like that? Alfred Hitchcock looks like that. He didn't talk like that.
Man, usually when I go to bed, Suzanne hates it, but I like to have the TV on for a little while, because I don't fall asleep right away.
Because Wednesday night, you like to stay up late and watch Kenny Omega.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Let's not use someone else's lyrics here, but I usually have Me TV on. It's black and white. I like the shows.
Yes.
And I go to bed many nights to Alfred Hitchcock coming on the screen. And all I can think now whenever I see him is, he does look like Heyman. He really does.
All right. Anyway, so we've built up to the match, and before we talk about the actual match, let's talk about stipulation for a second. Before we wax poetic about Daniel Bryan and Roman Reigns in a match for one of the world titles versus leaving SmackDown. Help me on this, and I know they've built it up that yes, Reigns said, "I'm sick of you. I don't want to look at you. You know, this place ain't big enough but I want you off of my show." All right, I get that, and that's why for the match, if he gets one chance and if he doesn't win, then he has to leave SmackDown forever. Yes, but into people's mind, Brian, is that enough of a penalty to put on Daniel Bryan to make this a big stipulation? You got to leave this show. People go back and forth from those shows all the time. They've got a draft. They just did a draft. People change back and forth. I guess what I'm saying is, yes, it works for their story, but it's diluted and watered down now when a stipulation is you can't be on this show anymore. You've got to either go to Raw or NXT or whatever. We got 3 or 4 other shows you can be on. Just can't be on this one. When you mentioned Heyman being the natural progression of a Northeastern manager. This is the natural leave SmackDown, seems to me to be the natural progression of loser leave town or loser leave the company. But now it's just loser leave this one show. Is that enough of a penalty? Is that a big deal to get? Because especially and loser retire, how can we forget those stipulations that almost nobody adheres to? So was this just, as a stipulation? It didn't have a lot of oomph behind it to me.
It doesn't have a lot of oomph if the next thing you see is him appear on Raw on Monday or NXT on Tuesday. If he just pops up on another show, no. And quite frankly, when you think about it, if you're thinking, wow, this is a guy that the little bits I know about his personal life are he loves his personal life. He has a family. He has kids. I bet he's going to love having Fridays off. They're not running house shows. He's about to get a long weekend every weekend.
But I guess, then, if that's the case, if he doesn't pop back up on Raw or NXT or whatever, then why would they not have advertised it as you've got to leave the WWE? Unless he's going to come back to another program fairly soon, why wouldn't you make it bigger? That's the question I'm asking. So we don't know maybe he's going to go home and come back in 3 weeks or whatever on Raw, or maybe even on SmackDown, since they don't care about their stipulations. But I remember when, if you're going to do a stipulation, especially involving the world title or one of them, it needed to be something of dire consequence to the end. As I said, in the territories, the loser leave town matches, people didn't know then when guys' runs were up and they were leaving to go to another territory. So loser leave town matches did great business, especially if it was an over babyface people didn't want to lose, and a hot heel that they really did want to lose, that it had a run. It's like, who's going to beat him? And boom. And when it was two guys that had been in a territory for a long time and had been established, then it really drew. Obviously, the first Lawler and Dundee, they did 2 of them. The second one was 3 years later and didn't do as well. But the first one sold out 11,300 people, turned probably 1,000 or 2 away, set a gate record in Memphis because Dundee had been there for 8 years and Lawler had been there for 11, and they couldn't call it. And if the loser leave the company still did business years ago when it became a company-wide thing and it was national television and you knew somebody couldn't go to a different territory, the loser leave the company or whatever, then they fucked that up by prostituting it, and then the loser retire. We know what's gone on there. But just leave this TV show was not a thrilling stipulation, but it was a free TV show. So what the fuck, right?
Do you think Lawler and Dundee in '83 both the match and, I guess looking at it in 2021 terms, the week before, the go-home show, both in Memphis and the localized version, or the syndicated version to the other towns. Do you think that's the best example of how to do it? Just the 1-2 punch of the build-up show and then the match?
Yes, because still in the internet didn't exist. Most of those people thought that their town was getting the exclusive match. That's why they pretty much set a record in every town. And the way they did it, for the people who are newer listeners, they did their regular 90-minute live TV show in Memphis on Saturday morning to promote the show on Monday night, which, as I mentioned, sold out 11,300. And they did a separate 1-hour pre-taped show to go to Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, Evansville, Indiana, and Lexington, Kentucky, to promote the show a week later, because there was a week's delay in the live show in Memphis and when it aired the following week in all those other markets. So they basically took that hour that would normally air the Memphis show from the previous week to instead do a 1-hour sit down with the principals, show the tapes. They even, to put more doubt in people's mind, that was at a time when they were working with, it was Ole in Georgia, right? Or who was speaking for Georgia at that point? But they had a couple of different promotions mention that they would, like those, if their top star was to lose and have to leave town or whatever.
Did you get that in Smoky Mountain directly from them doing it there in 83?
Yes, of course. And we just had, different fucking people to reach out to. That's why when I did it with the Heavenly Bodies into Rock and Roll, that was another one they couldn't call. That's why that finish got the biggest pop in the history of Smoky Mountain Wrestling from those people in Pikeville, because they didn't know. They knew that both teams had appeared on WWE television. They knew that some of the Memphis wrestlers had come back and forth and vice versa. So I had Eddie Marlin, and was it Eddie at the time in Memphis? Yeah. And Vince for the WWF say that, we'd be glad to have either one of these teams or whatever. So the point I'm making is that was always a big drawing stipulation when the stipulation was adhered to, and B, when the people couldn't call the finish. Who's going to have to leave this? And every territory, if we sat here and did a history of each territory individually, every territory had some big loser leave town match that people still remember because that was the end of some big stars era or whatever. And it was a major draw. But now you can't, unless you're really leaving the company, you can't have a loser leave town match, and then they don't want to fight. They just fire you on the internet and don't make a stipulation out of it. So that's another thing that we've lost, is just it's the way that they've prostituted the stipulations to begin with, and then the fact that nobody ever really does go away, and if they do, the company that they're leaving doesn't want you to know they're going, because they've already fucking beat you into powder and finished you up.
I think one of my favorite loser leaves town matches is, it's just perfect. The whole setting, everything's perfect. 1982 Mid-South Wrestling. It's supposed to be the tag team champions, the Junkyard Dog and Mr. Olympia versus Ted DiBiase and Hacksaw Duggan. But Hacksaw Duggan, nowhere to be seen. And it's set in a realistic way that you're like, oh man, it just sounds like this guy skipped town and isn't coming back. And the State Fair is outside the Irish McNeil Boys Club. And Paul Bosch and Bill Watts are in the crowd talking to these fans. It's packed with kids, people everywhere. There's a guy in a gorilla outfit from the State Fair dancing with the kids. So they announced that Ted DiBiase has a substitute partner for this match, where the stipulation is the loser leaves town. The loser of the fall leaves town. And it's Matt Bourne, who no one in Mid-South has ever heard of or seen. So now it's DiBiase and Matt Bourne against JYD, who's the most popular wrestler there, and Mr. Olympia, who was popular and fantastic in the ring, to having this match. The gorilla attacks during the match. Junkyard Dog reveals himself to be Hacksaw Jim Duggan, or as Bill Watts said on commentary, "That's Dugan! That's Dugan!" And the Junkyard Dog, not Matt Bourne, the guy you had never seen before, who you thought would have been the one to lose, but the Junkyard Dog loses, and that crowd felt it. They believed it. They really believed he was gone. Little did they know that there was a bully he had when he was a kid.
That's right. That no good Stagger Lee that used to steal my lunch money. He used to steal my lunch money. But now he the baddest man around, and I gone to get Stagger Lee to come back and take care of this situation. And I've got an update for you just real quick. Also, motherfucker, I've just looked out my window. They're back working on this goddamn fire hydrant at my neighbors. They've got hold on.
Well, this is an update.
There's a dump truck, a pickup truck, a box truck with flashing red lights, a pickup truck with flashing lights. They've got the goddamn traffic stop. People are turning around in my driveway. And the only thing that I can assume, because I can't reach my binoculars, is that these motherfuckers are continuing to work on this fire hydrant. I wish they'd go in my backyard. I got plenty of water. If they need some up here, they could reroute the shit from what I've got for free in my backyard.
Can they hear you from your office? Can you yell out the window? And
I could yell at that distance. I believe I'd be pissing in the wind, as they say.
Okay.
I could try it, but we got the rest of the program to do. Anyway, that's the update on the construction situation over here.
And that's the stipulations for a loser leaves town match.
That's right. Anyway, should we talk about then this loser? If Daniel Bryan loses, he leaves SmackDown versus the Universal one of the world champions. Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan on SmackDown, Paul Heyman in the corner, and Rudy Charles, good old Rudy Ray Charles, the referee. They don't call him by that anymore. Actually, their referees are anonymous drones, clones that have been made in a laboratory because they don't have names. I wonder if the WWE referees have belly buttons. What do you think?
A backwards thumb, so you know that it's a G.I. Joe.
Well, either that or that little pinky finger that doesn't bend. That way we know they're one of the invaders. Anyway, I mentioned earlier, Heyman classic promo. Everybody that wants to ever speak on a wrestling show should watch that promo, and then you'll realize how hopeless you are and just quit. They started it off hot, and the only thing I could think of is these guys look so good and they look so smooth. While they're not doing smooth, effortless, choreographed shit, they are working in a smooth fashion where they're actually grabbing the holes and they're shoving each other into the ropes to throw them off. But they're just so talented at doing it. And both guys look like a couple athletes. Daniel Bryan's smaller, but in this case, obviously he's the baby face. It works because there's that big bully Roman Reigns. And the way they were working it was that Daniel Bryan would be aggressive. He has to be aggressive. He's got to be faster. He's got to be all over this big fucker. But then Roman Reigns might shut him down with one big shot. And again, of course, they almost immediately went to a break. I know they were doing a long match, but I don't know why. On a championship match like this, I always like it when they're going to have the in-ring introductions and the big entrances and everything. Have the introductions and just say, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in 2 minutes with the bell for the championship match. Bryan and Reigns right after this, and ring the bell on the other side of the break. If they're not already hooked, for fuck's sake. Anyway, Reigns got heat on him and slowed it down and healed on him. Roman Reigns, his shit is sharp. He follows through with it. He's got heel attitude and body language, the facial expressions. You understand what he's fucking doing. And Daniel Bryan, for all his experience at being the underdog, the smaller guy, he's great at fighting back from underneath with a big bully. But when they would do even big moves that we constantly criticize so many of the modern folks for just doing these ridiculous moves, and then a finish will be a jackknife or a small package or whatever. These guys, they're doing the big moves, but they're registering them like it about half kills them, and they're taking the time to sell it, and there's a plausible way they get out of something or whatever. It's not just insulting and stupid, just over and over like a drum solo that never ends. They're peaks and valleys. Daniel Bryan goes for the Hurricane Run off the top, and Reigns catches him because he's fucking strong and power bombs him off the top. That was a heck of a false finish, and that was also a break spot. Now they didn't have to pop back up and go into cartwheels. And when they came back from the break, they were on the floor. And guess what? Reigns rattled him off the fucking rail or whatever and tossed him back in the ring and covered him and tried to win the match. And then they were back in the ring. So there's a nice placement of doing something on the floor where you left them in the ring selling. Now you come back and they're on the floor fighting. Oh, shit, well, that'll hook you. But then they're still having a match, and they can't do anything out there on the floor. They got to win in the ring. So, boom, they get back in the ring, cover, boom, 1-2, kick out, go on. Daniel Bryan hits Roman Reigns with that belly to back off the top. And both of them sold it like death. Did you see the bounce on Reigns that he fucking went with it? He looked like a fucking porpoise out of water. Boom. And then when Bryan crawls over and gets a 1, 2.5. Oh, no. And they go back and forth, but it's plausible. Daniel Bryan throws the kicks when the big guy's down, but when the big guy gets up and gets a base, he can catch him. Then Reigns goes out to the floor. Daniel Bryan does the dive. Reigns catches him in his arms and belly to bellies him on the floor. Boom. Holy shit. And now Daniel Bryan's fucked. But as Roman Reigns goes over and tries to hit him with the spear, Daniel Bryan didn't make a fucking comeback and press slam the guy after getting belly to bellied on the floor. He just fucking fell out of the way, and Reigns hits the goddamn barricade. Now they both sell and go through the break. They come back. They each did their big moves, but not in a row. When Daniel Bryan hit the big diving headbutt, boom, and he got a 2.5 count, Reigns didn't immediately get up and pick him up over his head and twirl him 3 times. No, they sold, and then finally they worked into a thing where Reigns came out of nowhere with the Superman punch. 2.5 count. Not quite. And Daniel Bryan tries to out-wrestle him with a couple of quick false finishes, quick wrestling moves. And then Reigns hits that big spear and knocks him out of his fucking shoes and almost gets it. They had good false finishes. They were back and forth. They were plausible. They were logical. It didn't, just come out of nowhere. Nobody took a fucking clothesline and then did a nip up as soon as they touched the mat and threw a fucking enziguri or whatever the fuck. And finally, it's modern WWE style. I never like to see a heel beat a top babyface, just beat him without any kind of out, distraction, even a mistake or whatever. But it was a great match, and Bryan hung in there every bit of the way. And then finally, he got the long yes lock. Reigns couldn't get out of it. He rolled through it a time or whatever the fuck. Finally, he turned out and power bombed him, grounded and pounded him, or pounded and grounded him, depending on. Michael said it right this time. It wasn't Michael Cole, was it? Well, there you go. Or was it Michael Cole on this fucking thing? I can't remember.
I thought it was. I thought it was him and McAfee.
You go. Yeah, it was him and McAfee. So then he said it right. He must have heard the show last week where we criticized that. Anyway, another power bomb and a front face lock, and Daniel Bryan passes out. That's all. I know they like to do it these days, that the heel can just beat the baby face and there's no excuse and there's no out. When you're a top guy, even if he'd Bryan had made one mistake on his own and they'd done the same thing. But nevertheless, great match. No weapons. Very minimal out of the ring. They didn't bury the referee. Everything made sense. Even if they didn't identify him, they didn't bury him. Everything made sense here. And, you know, it was done in a professional, serious manner. But then, of course, they can't leave anything alone. I will get your comments here in a second, but there was an afterbirth. Reigns goes for that stupid concerto bit. But Cesaro hits and makes save and wails on fucking Roman Reigns. And then Uso stops Cesaro, and they tie Cesaro up in the ropes, and Roman Reigns gave Daniel Bryan the chair deal anyway, and it looked phony as shit. And actually, even though they cut right on top of it, even on my DVR, you set it on slow motion, and you could see right through it. And that's why the back of the chair bent, because he hit the fucking mat with the other chair on it. Never touched Bryan. Bryan Danielson is his real goddamn name. And nobody expects it to, because you would see brains explode. So they had a great athletic contest. They got all the way through this without anything looking suspect, phony, or otherwise whatever. And then, can't he just hit him with the fucking chair? Or then don't do it. But why do something that looks phony that any putz with a DVR can see through? Because you can't do that move and make it look right unless you do kill the guy, who, by the way, has a history of concussions. Do something else. Your thoughts?
Really good match. These guys work well together. I enjoyed the match they had a few months ago at one of the pay-per-views. You refused to watch it because you had just been exposed to Randy Orton versus Alexa Bliss.
That's right.
So you turned it off, but they worked really well there. They worked well in the three-way match at WrestleMania. Here they are here. I had a similar thought, or of a similar vein to what you said earlier. As soon as you're watching, like, these guys are wrestlers. They both have a look. They both seem well-versed in the ring. Like, you know, you never see anyone trip on their own feet or anything. Yeah. I mean, these guys are wrestlers, and it's really good. I do it a little less of, at times, with Roman. See, his acting is good, but sometimes it's like the facial expressions as he's punching the ground. Like, come on, you're not King Kong. Like,
they tell him to do that stuff.
I know.
That's part of the,
I know. And Michael Cole has to yell out, that's vintage this, and yell out the guy's nickname. I get it. But it was really good. I wasn't crazy, like you said, about the thing at the end. I actually watched it on mute when Cesaro came out, and then the Uso attacked him, and then they all got in there. And we'll have to see what happens with Daniel Bryan.
Where will he pop up?
There are a lot of people that he's the one guy who's active. Like, you know, CM Punk, you hear this about. But Daniel Bryan's the one active guy that you still have a lot of fans. Wow, imagine if he went to AEW. Imagine if he went to New Japan. Imagine if he went to CMLL. Like, he's the one guy people fantasize about him going to different places and working.
I think he does too. Fantasize about going to different, because he likes wrestling. He wouldn't have gone through all this if he didn't. And, you know, I wish that more of his generation of independent wrestlers, instead of the modern generation of independent wrestlers, were in promotions other than the WWE. Guys that still take the business seriously, and maybe we wouldn't have some of the tomfoolery we've got in other places. But the point is, if he just pops up on Raw or whatever, then that's kind of, you know, on the stipulation. But a very good match. But you know what, Brian, to be honest, if Daniel Bryan is off of SmackDown forever, I know this would be a tragedy of epic proportions for him personally because of his deep love and commitment to the SmackDown brand. But if he is off of SmackDown, I can figure out something that we can get him that will make him feel better and make him remember his glory months on SmackDown this year. We can get him a painting by Paint Your Life of him standing in front of the SmackDown logo. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea. I was afraid you were transitioning to Stephen Pinu. I didn't know what you wanted to get Daniel Bryan.
No,
on his way out of WWE.
I don't think Stephen would sue to get him back on SmackDown. He likes Daniel Bryan. But anyway, If you do want to get a painting of yourself in a place you would love to be but haven't been there in a while or ever, or if you'd like to get a painting of your family all together, even if they never were in real life, the folks at Paint Your Life can fix you up because they take any photograph or combination of photographs and turn them into professional hand-painted portraits. You can choose from a team of world-class artists. You can go through the quick and easy process of ordering the portrait and get it in about 3 weeks. And you can send any picture, as I said, yourself, your kids, your family, special place, cherished pet, or combine photos for generations, or put yourself in the place you'd like to be, or put your wife in the place you'd like her to be, somewhere in a painting far, far away, and you put it on the wall and you look at whatever the case may be. All you got to do is go to paintyourlife.com and check it out. There's no risk. If you love the final painting, or if you don't love the final painting, your money is refunded. If you love the final painting, and most people do, well, then you're happy and we're done here. But right now, as a limited time offer, you can get 20% off your painting from paintyourlife.com, 20% off and free shipping. And to get this special offer, you just text the word DRIVE, D-R-I-V-E, to 64,000. Drive to 64,000. That's 64 with 3 zeros. Drive to 64000. Paint your life. Celebrate the moments that matter most. And if you get kicked off a Smackdown, remember the glory years. Terms apply. Available at paintyourlife.com/terms.
Well, Jim, those are the terms, and we have lots of questions that have been sent in by the Cult of Cornette.
Well, it's your show. There's no reason for me to direct the flow of the conversation. Ask me a question if you want to.
That's why I curate these questions that are sent in via email and, of course, on Twitter, and we have so many questions. I curate them, as I said before. Yes.
Yes. Say, did you watch the Randy Savage biography, by the way? That's a question.
You know, I did, because I was going to watch it later in the week, but I spoke to this guy that said, people are really pissed at you for not watching the biography last week. And I didn't know anyone had this reaction. So I did indeed watch the Randy Savage one.
Well, it was on Twitter last week. The people were dismayed that I watched the show and spoke about the show, but you had forgotten the show was on, and some even chastised you for not going back to the on-demand service or whatever. So I said, this week we should talk while it's timely, and I especially wanted to see what you thought of it, because of the various things that I thought of it. And the biggest one is, honestly, before we talk about the Randy Savage biography on A&E, we ought to talk about the Poffo family's wrestling promotion, ICW, because if you watched the Randy Savage biography on A&E, you don't know what the fuck it was, do you? Could you figure out from how they described their family promotion what the fuck it actually was, where it was, and what was going on?
It was just a family business that expanded outward from wherever they were located. And I will say, too, I noticed that Vince used to use it, and now Bruce is using it, the word fiefdom. All these promoters had their fiefdoms all around the country, you see.
So somebody said on Twitter, why were they calling it thiefdoms? Were they saying that all the promoters were thieves? Fief, F-I-E-F,
right.
fiefdom. In the old days, that was a tiny little fiefdom, an island unto itself, a self-ruled whatever. But actually, that was another problem I had, and I said this last week with Steve Austin. It was easy. He started in Texas. It was in kind of Memphis concurrently for a short period of time. Went to WCW and then WWF. With Piper, even though it was more complicated, they still took a more chronological tone. Even though, as I mentioned, they conflated Georgia and Mid-Atlantic and skipped over Crockett, his name and his company whatsoever, even though they were using the footage, he was never mentioned, which was a big part of Roddy's career. But in this case, basically Randy gets hurt and can't make it in baseball, and turns to the family business, which apparently was their own promotion, and the first 5 years of his career never happened, and he's in ICW, and then we don't really know what the fuck that was. And all we know was that Lawler said, yeah, they were really talking about a match that was never going to take place. It was it confusing unless you knew the story to most people of what was going on there?
I think if you're a flighty viewer, you kind of are just watching it and not picking up on things. If you're a kid who's obsessed with wrestling and you're trying to follow along, it's going to be hard to figure out the exacts.
Yeah.
Who, what, when, where, why. The word outlaw never used.
Well, since you don't know a brief history of Savage's early years, since you don't know if you watched the biography, yes, what was it, 74? He started working, because that was, I think, the year that 74, 75. And obviously it was the family business, because Angelo Poffo had been a wrestler and was his father. And also it was, this is where it's going to get complicated. And this is another reason why they can't do it in 2 hours anyway. Before Angelo and Lanny and Randy started International Championship Wrestling, ICW, in 1979, Angelo Poffo had been an investor in literally almost exactly the same geographic territory in 1972 and 73 when Phil Golden tried to run opposition to the Gulas Welch office and Jerry Jarrett. There is and they saw the same thing that Jerry Jarrett had seen in 1970. There was a strip of towns that were dark, basically following across Interstate 64 from southern Illinois over into West Virginia, Louisville and Lexington and Evansville. And when Jarrett opened those up, then Phil Golden, a couple of years later, was able to get TV out in Paducah, Kentucky, which is in far western Kentucky, and right next to southern Illinois. Angelo Poffo lived in Illinois at that time. He's from Chicago, Downers Grove, etc. And he wasn't being used by any of the NWA offices or traditional offices, but he got in with Phil Golden and was an early investor and was one of their top heels. And they'd try to make a go of it all the way from Paducah and southern Illinois, Cape Girardeau, Missouri, all the way through Louisville, Lexington, and into West Virginia. Stephen P. New probably remembers some of that from his childhood. And that only lasted a year or two. But then several years later, Randy got into business, and Randy and Angelo and Lanny had worked for the Sheik in Detroit. And they'd also worked they skipped over Tennessee, and the Waffle House story would have been a good one. Where Randy and the Police Dog went 2 out of 3 falls at the Waffle House in Nashville. But Randy and Lanny had both worked for Gulas and worked on top for quite some time. That's when he was having matches with Dutch Mantell and Bobby Eaton for the Mid-America title. And that's where he had really become the first time he had become a main event guy and started using the Macho Man gimmick. And then they all got booked up in the Maritimes. Was it Halifax for, oh, God damn it. It was Emile Dupree, right? They spent some time up there.
I think so.
In late 78, early 79, and that's where, early 79, because that's where they got the idea to come back. And Angelo, the reason why Angelo's gimmick when in ICW was the miser was not only because he facially looked older, but he was in incredible physical shape, so they put a mask on him, but also because that was Angelo. He was a fucking miser. I've heard Rip Rogers tell stories. He would limit the times that he washed his clothes because he didn't want the detergent to break down the fibers and cause the clothes to wear out quicker. So Angelo Poffo had some money, and they came back and started a promotion that they were going to run in some of the same cities across this I-64 corridor in Kentucky and over in West Virginia, and called it ICW, International Championship Wrestling. And when they first did television in Lexington at Old Channel 62, they used a match that Lanny had with Randy in Halifax on March 13, 1979, as when he won the ICW world title. And they did incredibly low-budget television at Channel 62, where the first time, I think the first day they taped, they did like 8 or 10 shows, and nobody even knew that it was a thing that existed. So they had literally some of the underneath guys and a few station employees, wives, girlfriends, whatever, sitting in the crowd and used the cardboard cutout thing of people past the first row. But they got TV in Lexington and down in Eastern Kentucky, I think on the Hazard station, probably had it over in West Virginia for a while, eventually got it in Louisville. What doomed them in Louisville was that Fox 41 wanted to counter program against the Wave 3 Jarrett wrestling show that was doing monster numbers, so they put it on at 11:30 to 12:30, thinking that the wrestling fans would stick with it. And instead, everybody saw 30 minutes of ICW and then changed over to Channel 3. But they were always running more Eastern Kentucky stuff than Jarrett ran. They were always running towns like Frankfort, Kentucky, that Jarrett wouldn't go to because, to be honest, it never drew. But they always wanted to get to Memphis especially, and they did early on a couple of times at the Cook Convention Center, but you couldn't in 1979. Later on in 1980, they were a little bit more vulnerable when Lawler was out with a broken leg, but they could never get TV in Memphis that anybody would pay attention to and get a foothold into running that town. They ran Louisville a number of times at the Commonwealth Convention Center downtown and didn't do any business because the Gardens was running every Tuesday night. And that was, like I said, mostly especially when they got to 81 and 82, when Lawler came back and business was booming, that ran ICW further over into Eastern Kentucky where they were more unopposed, and they did some good houses. They used to run Manchester, Kentucky, and because they didn't have a building at one point in Manchester that they could have any kind of wrestling matches in. This fan named Ernie Couch said, "Why can't you come to Manchester? Bring the matches to Manchester. We don't have a building. We can't run." He actually put up one of those pole barns in his backyard that they could seat like 400 or 500 people in or whatever, so that they would bring matches and they would advertise it, "If we're coming to Manchester at Ernie Couch's place." And that's how they'd advertise the matches, and they ran it regularly. And then later on, when he added, I guess, like pinball machines and a fucking jukebox, they started calling it Ernie Couch's Entertainment Center. But the thing early on, if they could have gotten television, maybe they'd have had a chance because they had so much more talent. If they could have gotten strong TV and gotten buildings and had a little bit more of a budget at the start, ICW was the Poffos promotion they started. But at the same time that they're trying to run opposite Jarrett in Louisville and Lexington up here, that was when, and you know from the Ron Fuller's Studcast, the guys split off from Ron's Southeastern in Knoxville and started All-Star Wrestling in 1979 also. And that was Bob Roop, Bob Orton Jr., Ronnie Garvin, Boris Malenko. And those were big, major veteran names in wrestling. But suddenly they've started running opposition because they were trying to do the same thing. They thought they could be the owners and the promoters and they could take over the territory. That's where the money was.
Don't forget Ron Wright.
And Ron Wright, who actually had been an owner in Kingsport, and Ron he didn't get involved with ICW because he didn't want to travel. So he was helping them run All-Star against Ron Fuller in East Tennessee. But then somehow they had a parley. They had a parley, and suddenly the Poffos started working with the Outlaws in Knoxville, and they were working on each other's shows. Except that's why Ron Wright never actually came up and did ICW television or did their house shows up here. And so, but at the time, think about this. On television, Lanny was a heck of a worker back then. Nobody had seen him, but he was first one to do the moonsault and all that other shit. Randy Savage, who was incredible in the ring and had just started doing the Macho Man promos, and it was like his real raw best stuff, and you could get away with saying anything on this program. Bob Orton Jr., one of the best workers in the business. Ronnie Garvin. Garvin at that time was not, the clean boots and the tights and the hands of stone from the mid-'80s in Crockett and the, blonde crew cut. He was almost 10 years younger. He'd always been a tag team guy. He'd never been a main event singles guy. But in Knoxville, they got him over because he bled and he could fight and he was a tough guy. And he did the fucking brawling shit and the crazy angles. He threw the fucking title belt off the Gay Street Bridge. And people thought he was nuts and thought he was a badass, which he was, both cases. And so he got over first as a heel. And then that's when Andre came in, and Andre sold for him and let Ronnie Garvin, French Canadians, stick together. Ronnie Garvin kicked shit out of Andre the Giant in Knoxville. So then when he switched babyface, he was a top guy. That was his best run as a single in his career.
And he was the biggest star out of all of them in that area.
In that area, he was the biggest star. And Boris Malenko, of course, had been a legend in Florida. He was on the tail end of his in-ring career. Roop was a shooter, but he had been everywhere, but not ever a top guy. But point is, you've got those guys on that TV show, plus Rip Rogers. Savage had met Rip Rogers when they were working for Nick. I think Rip was there at the Waffle House. And Rip kind of idolized Savage and wanted to learn the business. He was a rookie at that point, but he was a bodybuilder. And all those guys were in great shape. Of course, some of the guys that worked for Jarrett used to joke that that's all they had to do was go to the gym because they weren't employed anywhere where they were making any fucking money. But Rip was a good young talent, and they were, at that point, they had all those top guys, but then the rest of the card fell off bad because then they were having to use local outlaws. And after a while, they started training some guys, and they developed their own guys. Doug Vines and Jeff Sword were a pretty solid tag team, worked a few places. With their manager, Izzy Slapowitz. The Devil's Duo was Vines and Sword, and they had Izzy Slapowitz, who was what? Help me with the terminology. The Jewish folks in the Northeast there that have the curly hair.
He was supposed to be a Hasidic Jew, but his real name, I think, was what? Jeff Smith.
Yeah, but he would talk like this is Izzy Slapowitz and the Devil's Duo, and me and Heenan didn't necessarily have anything to worry about, but he was fun, right? And they came up with Crusher Broomfield, who would later become the One Man Gang, and that was Ronnie Garvin's nickname. Actually, in Knoxville was the One Man Gang, Ronnie Garvin. But before George Gray became Gang, he was Crusher Broomfield. He was 6'5" or whatever and 350 pounds. But he reminded everybody of Crusher Blackwell because when you would see him in those early TVs, they'd shoot him off and he'd take the forward bump in the buckle and go over the top and fucking take a big bump, which for a guy that size and you'd never heard of, you could tell he was going to be a star, but then he was still green. But like I said, they had either guys that were on the way up, guys that were on the way out, or in some cases, some other guys that just got caught up and couldn't get booked by the territories because they were on the wrong side of the established promotions for one side or the other, or one reason or the other. But they lasted from 1979 until fall of 83. And we've covered this on the show when we talked about Dundee leaving Memphis and going to Mid-South Wrestling to become the booker. It may have been that Savage, now that we're looking at these shows, had a spot to go work for Bill Watts when they folded their company up. But instead, when he found out Dundee was going to be the booker, he turned around and deviated and went to Memphis, and they were able to finally have the matches that they'd been promoting. And that was touched on in the biography also. From the start, another thing that was always said was they spent more time cutting promos on matches they weren't going to have against Jarrett's guys than they did to get their own talent over. And to be honest with you, it wouldn't have mattered. They had good in-ring talent. I don't know who was booking during all those years, but fucking Eddie Graham didn't have anything to worry about. a fan's perception of that show at that time was that we could take low budget because at least we watch anything regarding wrestling, right? But even though the talent was great, and you're having these matches with Randy Savage against Lanny Poffo and Bob Orton Jr. and Boris Malenko against this guy and that guy on television, it's great work. But these guys, it was the fans' assumption was that all these guys were in this obviously second-rate promotion because they were probably all crazy and on drugs, because that's what they looked like, that's what they talked like, and sometimes that's what the angles were booked like. And it wasn't going to beat the established promotion with the names that the people knew, for everybody from Lance Russell to Jerry Lawler to Bill Dundee to Austin Idol to Jimmy Valiant to whatever, and especially all the huge names that Jarrett would bring in, and the world title matches, whether it be NWA, AWA, whatever. They at one point, ICW would use the Sheik and his guys in the dying days of, the Detroit promotion, and the Sheik, because they had started there, Randy and Lanny, because Sheik and Angelo Poffo were old friends. So you'd have the Sheik defending the U.S. title on an ICW show against Ox Baker in 1983. Can you imagine what that looked like? While there's, Jerry Lawler in the main event on the other promotion with Austin Idol or Stan Hansen and Jimmy Valiant or whatever the fuck, and it wasn't going to work. But it got heated enough, and they had a brief allusion to this. We've told the story that Lexington was where all the ICW guys lived, and Jarrett ran Rupp Arena there once a month. So, and that's where the ICW guys were taping their television. So all the promos, especially, were on Randy Savage saying, if Jerry Lawler will face me in such and such time, then I'll put up $100,000, which everybody knew they didn't have $100,000. They didn't have $10,000 probably. Again, all he has to bring is a ham sandwich. Or he would challenge Dundee, Jarrett, and Tojo Yamamoto when Tojo wasn't even figured in, just because that was a Jarrett name. 3-on-1 with $100,000 going to charity or whatever the fuck. And people knew these matches were not going to take place, but they were the biggest part of their newspaper ads and TV shows. So finally, Rupp Arena calls Christine Jarrett and said they've gotten word that some of the ICW wrestlers have bought ringside tickets and they're going to be there. And so they had extra security and they wouldn't let them in the building. So then they started a couple of shows, 2 or 3 shows in a row. The ICW guys would stand out back when the Memphis wrestlers would pull up in the parking lot and go in the back area. And that it's been developed since then. That's been 40 years ago. So there's a huge parking area, but back then it was a little tighter. So instead of causing any controversy or confrontation out in the parking lot, Rupp Arena started letting all the guys pull in and park inside the building because it's a huge complex. So the ICW guys would be out there trying to start shit, and the Memphis guys wouldn't have to get out of their car. They'd pull right in the building. But all the guys brought their guns because the boys believed, and probably rightfully so, that most of the guys working ICW were either impaired or crazy or both. And so they weren't taking any chances. And especially after the thing happened with Savage and Dundee at the gym in Nashville. And Dundee ended up with a broken jaw. And gunplay was involved. So they couldn't stir anything up there because Rupp Arena wouldn't put them over and got security to keep them away. So it was a constant harassment, and that's where I got plenty of lectures from Teeny on the Outlaws. But finally, when they had to close up, all those promos ended up working in a way, but it made money for Jerry Jarrett rather than the Poffo family, because then when they apologized and can we work together, and they bring Savage in to have the one-on-one at Rupp Arena in Lexington with Lawler, they drew over 8,000 people in Lexington, Kentucky.
Although on the Biography special, when they said the match was in Lexington, it was in the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis.
Well, yeah, that was another thing I was going to mention. They identified it as Lexington. That was the Mid-South. There is no tape of the match in Lexington because they didn't bring the camera to Lexington that week or that month. But little misleading things like that. But so I guess and then, what was it? By 81, Malenko retired at that point, and he was pretty much done in the ring and went back to Florida to start training people.
And run Outlaw. I mean, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Everyone involved has a long history with different, I use the word outlaw, but you know what I mean, outlaw promotions. I mean, Angelo Poffo and Lanny, when Lanny was like right out of high school, they worked for Ann Gunkel. Obviously, you talked about the stuff he did previously. So, I mean, everyone kind of had a little, and Izzy Slapowitz came out of working for the Culkins, which was an outlaw group.
That's right.
A year earlier, 78?
Yeah, and that's where Troy Graham got started, 77, 78, working for the Culkins. And Kamala, Sugar Bear Harris.
Freebirds.
But Roop and Garvin obviously still had some cachet in the wrestling business, and Roop and Orton got back in, and Orton did too. Roop and Orton got back in by going to Mid-South. Where did Garvin go first?
Garvin, I think, went to Georgia because Ole, very similar to Watts, was willing to accept anyone, and Ole was in a more desperate position, whether he would acknowledge that or not, than Bill Watts was. So he just grabbed any talent he could. He didn't care about pissing people off.
But so that's by 81 or so, Orton and Roop and Garvin and Malenko had said, well, this is not going to work. So when they had left, that's when the next wave, moved up in ICW, and Pez Whatley was there for a long time. But it got weaker as they went on instead of stronger. And then, like I said, when they were bringing in Sheik and Ox Baker, I'm like, oh fuck, this is close to the end. So that
didn't Pez get back in through Georgia too?
Pez went back to Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. They all had. Rip Rogers went to Georgia. They all had to get back in the mainstream sooner or later. Well, not all of them. Some of them never did. That's why we're not talking about them. You don't know who they are. But they made it from, as I said, from 79 to the end of 83. But by that point, Randy had been in the business almost 10 years, and they really did. Well, it's a family business, and boy, they were mad at each other there down in our territory, and then boom. And then he goes to the WWF. So it was hard to follow all of that. It's probably hard to follow what we just said, but it was extra hard to follow all that. Although they did have some good ICW footage, including Angelo must save some of those masters because some of it looked good enough to be off the masters instead of VHS. But that show they even did an angle one time. I think it was involving Ronnie Garvin. Why wouldn't it have been? Where the heels put the baby face out by injecting them with a hypodermic. And this was in 1981. I'm going, what the fuck is going on here? Anyway.
ICW really was like the perfect storm of an outlaw promotion to run against. First Ron Fuller with All-Star, but then specifically Jerry Jarrett. Because even the little story, I mean, it wasn't here, but the story with Weingroff. Saul Weingroff falls out with the office all due to the relationship with Jerry Jarrett, who's in ICW, his son, George Weingroff.
George, yeah.
So now you have the Weingroffs involved with this. And again, when they were on the run trying to get out of town after the Bill Dundee incident in the parking lot, Saul Weingroff was working for the sheriff's department. Didn't he help them out getting out of town?
Well, wouldn't you know who won the pony? I don't want to finger anybody on that one. There's been several different stories told, but yeah, it just, it was a one-sided promotional war, but it was still bitter. There have been promotional wars that either didn't last long, like Jarrett and Nick Goulis's, and it was one-sided, or promotional wars like, Atlanta, All South, and the Georgia office, where it lasted for a while and it was close for a while and it was bitter, or Bruiser and Sheik, where it was bitter and it lasted for a while and it was really close. This is the only one I've ever can remember that lasted this long and was this bitter and was never even remotely close. That's the problem. It was like, what the fuck?
You know what I don't understand is exactly how Angelo Poffo ended up in this predicament. Because if you go back to the late 50s, early 60s, he's a big star. I mean, he's all over the Chicago magazines and programs. He's a pretty big star. Angelo Poffo and Bronco Lubitsch.
Yeah.
And everything he's doing. Chicago, he's a big star. And then, like you said, by the early 70s, he's doing these outlaw shows in Kentucky. I have some of the programs and they're just like drawn in marker. I mean, it's a real step down. How did that happen to Angelo Poffo? Like, he was a pretty significant name. He always had the little thing of the Guinness Book record. But he went from being a pretty good-sized star in Chicago, a major market, to being someone who only worked outlaw shows the rest of his career.
Here's the thing. Him being, and the show mentioned all the family was careful with their money. But him being a wrestler that long and knowing that being a promoter is where the big money was, I can see why he would have wanted to be in that position, but I don't know why he might have gotten into some, because I mean, I saw Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling first run on television, and it was actually the same kind of thing. You could tell this is clearly the folks that would like to be the top company rather than the top company. It was very small with not big names. But he was the top heel. But I don't know. But between the only established offices that Angelo or his family worked for until they made up with Jarrett in '84 for over a 10-year period were the Sheiks when he was working with more outlaws than against them, and Nick when Nick had lost Jerry Jarrett and his crew, and all he was working with was the Sheik. Otherwise, it was all outlaw stuff.
Almost everyone else who worked for Gunkel came out of that promotion and had a job somewhere. I mean, the booker, Tom Ernesto, came out of that and was the booker for Georgia. But I mean, almost everyone who worked there later went on to have a career. It didn't hurt Ernie Ladd's career at all. It didn't really happen with them. They went outlaw. They stayed outlaw. Like you said, other than working with Nick for a while. And there was even footage of Randy Savage in a documentary on Nick Goulis's TV. But other than that, outlaw all the way. Which they would deny, but.
Well, anyway. So now that we've given everybody a brief history of ICW wrestling, should we actually talk about the biography special on Randy Savage? Because we've taken the piss out of the part that portrayed his early life. I was glad, like I said, on the show, I was glad to see that old ICW footage and some of the old Memphis footage, but it was since they used it almost interchangeably and didn't identify what was Memphis and what wasn't. And they were there, most of, but not all of 1984 in Memphis working for Jarrett.
Well, Lanny came in a little bit after Randy because he was in Mid-South already for what was supposed to happen. Randy came in December 83. He left the spring of 85. So.
Okay, so a little over a year.
Yeah, a little over a year.
And they did some good stuff in that point. They didn't even show Randy pile driving Ricky Morton through the table in Memphis. The first one of those that everybody's had to imitate. But so anyway, the early footage was somewhat jumbled. I was glad to see that they gave Pampero Firpo the nod for, oh yeah.
And what a weird, I shouldn't say it.
What?
I don't understand the relationship between Lanny and Randy. Because even Lanny's like, I was afraid to speak to my brother. I never gave him any advice. I would never dare give him advice. And then one day he asked me for... And it's his brother. They've been growing up together. I've seen pictures of them as little kids together. It's not like all of a sudden he was dropped in with this crazy, wide-eyed, coked-up maniac. He's known the guy his whole life.
I'm just saying, the one point they made, and the point that I know from being around him a bit and just obviously watching so long, is Randy was fucking intense. And
Did you enjoy?
That was the thing.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, did you enjoy the Debbie Combs interview in this?
We'll get to the talking heads in a minute. But that was the highlight of watching ICW television, was watching the Randy Savage promos. And I mean, just the fact that this guy, regardless of what you think about the wrestling business or anything else, he's fucking nuts and you can't take your eyes off of him. And when he was coming, that was the early Macho Man before he ever even got to the WWF. Like we've said, with Piper, his best promos and in-ring stuff was in the Carolinas, maybe some in Portland. I think Savage's best in-ring stuff was in ICW/Memphis before he went to the W. I'm not talking about the most famous. I'm talking about when he was the youngest. He'd gotten experience. He'd become the Macho Man, but he hadn't had any injuries, and he still hadn't got heavy on the shit to bulk himself up for New York. That's when he was just amazing. I mean, just like a fucking cat. But you would see this guy either on a promo or in the ring or whatever, and you'd go, he can't be a work. Nobody moves like that. Nobody acts like that. Nobody talks like that. Ooh, yeah. Guaranteed personified man. March 13, 1979, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Randy Macho Man Savage defeated Leaping Lanny Poffo for the ICW World Heavyweight Championship. Dig it. What the fuck is it? And he would go on and on. So anyway,
the confetti was always a nice touch.
And he would bring the confetti out of his pocket. He had his own confetti.
That is still the best.
And and we would hear the stories. And now I've had people say this. He was doing anything to get noticed. He got arrested one time for shoplifting a fucking round steak from the Kroger on New Circle Road in Lexington. And just shoved it down the front of his pants. And it made the fucking papers. It wasn't as picturesque a story as the goddamn Waffle House thing.
But ICW announcer Tim Tyler told me that Randy did that for publicity. It was intentional. They talked about it beforehand.
And, you'd talk to some of the young ladies, formerly known as rats, who would say he lived in an apartment with just like a fucking weight bench and weightlifting equipment and a mattress on the floor. I mean, you knew they were making no money, but he was a guy who literally went from, in 1983, their business closed down, and I don't know that he was on a show that drew 1,500 people, to 1984 working for Jarrett and doing big houses in Memphis and Lexington, and probably still, back then, would he have made $50,000 that year? And in 1985 or 86, he's, in the WWF making fucking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So he went from the outhouse to the penthouse in 18 months.
The thing that's unique about Randy Savage that kind of needs to just be said is that there are always outlaw groups. Dale TNT Man, to throw a name out there.
Yes.
Running shows, which Randy was on some of his shows. But there's the case of a guy running his own shows. He's the biggest star on his own shows. It just so happened with ICW, they were running their own shows, promoting their own shows, and Randy was, which no one knew, I'm not going to say the best, but one of the best in-ring guys in the entire business, doing things no one else had ever done before. The double axe handle from the top rope to the floor in small shows, all over the South. No one did anything like that. It's amazing, like Hogan said in the documentary, that he never had severe knee injuries from all the things he did.
Until the big severe knee injury from doing the axe handle off top of the cage in a match with Hogan.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, first of all, have you ever seen a documentary with so many different talking heads?
There were a lot of people. Some people I was surprised by, yes.
I thought I was going to see you pop up with a comment or two. It got to the last couple of weeks has been, obviously we said they're doing programs to appeal to the wrestling fan, and they're primarily the wrestling career, which is fine. And they're playing the hits, they're hitting the high spots. They're not going to talk about fucking Portland wrestling for Piper as long as they talk about the WWF, nor should they. But we were getting close friends, usually in the business, people that had worked with this talent, maybe a historian or a reporter, people germane to the story. This was like you never knew what head was going to pop up next to say something about Randy Savage. Not that all of them doesn't have the right to speak about Randy Savage, but and Natalia's a wonderful young lady. Why is Natalia a talking head on a documentary about Randy Savage? And there were bizarre. I've never seen Bubba the Love Sponge before. I've heard of him, heard his voice, and obviously we have said horrible things to each other on Twitter a few years back when he was actually somebody. But God, he's a fat, ugly gremlin. But the only reason he was there was because he was the facilitator of Hulk Hogan's radio promos on Randy Savage that got almost as much time being talked about on this show as Randy's ICW 5-year run did, because Hogan was on there constantly. And when I was listening to him tell these stories, I don't know why, but the words obnoxiously and egregiously disingenuous popped up in my head, just for no reason at all. But there was a million talking heads, too many of them. And I liked hearing Ricky Steamboat talk about Randy Savage because they were in the famous match that they covered. I don't know if I want to hear somebody that never met Randy Savage talking about what they think of him. Right?
Yeah, typically, I saw some feedback before I watched it where people groaned because this Pete Rosenberg guy was involved with this. So when I watched it, I thought about that because I hated that Shoemaker idiot from the Andre the Giant documentary that just said was a wrestling historian and then was just flat out saying shit that wasn't true. So I didn't know what to expect, but I actually thought he did all right, Pete Rosenberg, on this. Again, you have to ask yourself, what's his place in being on this? I guess they just wanted some super fans of Randy Savage because they had that actor also.
The actor actually did a fairly good job also, and he did a good impersonation. And there was a lot of people. And a lot of Elizabeth. Not saying you shouldn't cover Elizabeth. I mean, that would be leaving things out also. But then we went down the rabbit hole. Randy and Elizabeth were together for 7 years and worked together in WCW for another 12 months, 18 months, whatever the fuck.
No longer than that.
Did they use Elizabeth that long?
Elizabeth was there from early 96, maybe late 95, but early 96 until near the end, if not the end.
Shit. Well, she hid good. But anyway, the point is she wasn't with Randy all that time, but then we went to the rabbit hole with Elizabeth and Luger and that story, and it was just, I don't know that this was easy to follow chronologically as it could have been. I think that everybody had an opinion, which made it hard to focus on the people's opinions that were really close to the thing. They went in a variety of different directions. We learned a lot about his love life.
Yeah, the thing with Gorgeous George's sister where they said, we agreed not to show our camera because of some of the things we're about to say. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
What are they going to say?
Talk about the Dalmatian, and they're going to talk. And what was it she said? I can't remember now. What was so controversial?
The only thing I could think of was that Randy liked ecstasy.
Well, I wouldn't know specifically, but if you showed me a video of Randy Savage at some period in his life and said, no, that guy's taking some chemicals, I wouldn't doubt you. But I don't know she need to be presented like a mob witness for that.
See, it would have worked in 1980 because he could have used it in promos. I'm on ecstasy! It would have fitted perfectly.
But yeah, it got into Hogan and the Fat Sponge talking about how they fucked with Randy on the radio in Tampa, and then we went off into the whole Gorgeous George story, and then Elizabeth's, affair and life with Luger, and that situation. And I mean, it was a bunch of stories that you might enjoy about Randy Savage, but I don't know that it was a biography in the strict term. Do you?
It was a lot of things. It was a lot of the problems I've had with wrestling-based documentaries in the past, where sometimes the story just goes all over the place and there's no real good reason why. It just messes with the narrative. I mean, the Elizabeth stuff, all of a sudden we have Bischoff's wife on here as a talking head.
Who's a well-known friend of Elizabeth that we found out by the graphic. Friend of Elizabeth. Yeah,
and then they have Lex there, and the Hogan stuff that was really Hogan heavy towards the end of it there. And Lanny seems to know nothing. I mean, that's the other thing. Lanny, we just reviewed on Pro Wrestling Spotlight Then and Now. John Arezzi had that roundtable about the Persian Gulf War exploitation with Dave Meltzer, Steve Beverly, and Lanny Poffo. And Lanny literally says in the beginning that he's not as well versed as the others, so he's going to talk in, quote, glittering generalities and skirt the issue. And that's literally what he does anytime I hear him talk. It sounds nice because of that voice, but what is he saying? No insight.
Did Lanny miss an opportunity to be a voiceover artist? With the way things have blown up for the voiceover artist, that tone he could have. And the only other thing, I appreciate that they covered a great match like Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat, and I wish that they hadn't had to make sure that Ricky told the story of how Savage worked it out obsessively and minutely ahead of time and wrote it down and everything, because that kind of takes some of the fucking special off of it to me. That's why I liked Savage and Steamboat's WrestleMania 3 match, and especially for the WWF in the ring, that was some special shit. But that's why I liked Flair and Steamboat. Any of their matches better because they spent literally minutes talking about anything beforehand.
It didn't bother me so much just because Ricky has told the story a lot. I mean, I know it's different. It's on TV.
I'm not saying they're breaking new ground, but that's the whole thing. That's a lot of guys, when they saw Savage starting to do that, that's where they thought that it was a thing that everybody had always done. Work out your match ahead of time, and here we are.
That's what Dallas Page started doing because of Randy Savage, he said.
Yeah.
I will say, too, this documentary had what I was told in the moment, before all the rumors about Randy and Stephanie started at some point. I was told in the mid-90s, and I knew a few people who were involved in things, that Vince was mad at Randy because when the WWE was having financial problems, Randy took the Slim Jim deal to WCW because they tried to keep it and have Bam Bam Bigelow as the face of Slim Jim for a brief period of time. And Slim Jim went with Randy.
I love Bam Bam, but would you want his face as your face of anything?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the firebrand of Slim Jims. But I was always told in the moment when it happened in the mid-90s that Randy taking the Slim Jim deal pissed off Vince to the nth degree. He thought that was his deal. He thought that was his sponsor. Yeah. And it didn't say that was the reason for their falling out here, but they did spend a little bit of time pointing out that it was a $750,000 a year deal. So it was a big deal. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I had heard that when Randy left. And so that's also King. Once again, I love Lawler's work, but his memory is shite. He said that when Randy left, how was it he phrased it? When Randy left, he went to Vince and said, "Hey, look at the other channel." That wasn't Randy. They weren't doing live TV. That was Luger. That they saw on live TV. But I was there the day that Randy had announced or given his notice or whatever, and Vince made that statement, "We wish you the best," because that's when they had me do for about 6 weeks fill in color commentary because Lawler was still working in the ring at that point. So he didn't fill in for Savage at that time, as I remember it. And because I've told you that story, the reason why I remember the day that Savage wasn't there and we all found out about it was because that's when we were at that fucking resort place in the Poconos, and we had to do Raw, and then I went back to my room no room service, no place anywhere around to get any food, and I'm alone with a heart-shaped jacuzzi. So I'm like, motherfucker. But that was when Savage left. So anyway, the King was a little confused there, but they did not see Randy on live TV and find out that that's how he had left. But yeah, we heard immediately about the Slim Jim thing. There was some heat there at the time. So this was before the conspiracy theorists with all the Stephanie stuff.
As far as Randy getting upset with Hogan because of Hogan and Linda hanging out with Elizabeth in Miami, I don't know what happened or didn't happen. But
I know a little bit more than they said. The reason why that Elizabeth's bed was not being slept in, as Hogan referred to it, was because she had somehow met somebody and had left Randy and had come to stay at Hulk and Linda Hogan's place, but was actually had her stuff there, but was staying with the guy that she had met that was not involved in the wrestling business.
Now, that's not the way Hulk Hogan told the story.
I bet you that those words have been uttered a number of times in the past.
I was going to say, knowing how disingenuous he is and knowing now more to the story that he may have left out there, you can totally see why Randy Savage wanted to kill the guy.
Yeah, Savage came in and Savage found out about this whole thing and that they had been providing the cover. And that's where Hogan ended up with the black eye.
How about Hogan saying in the documentary that he's the one who popularized wrestlers moving to Tampa? Did you hear that?
Yeah. So I brought a bunch of guys down because he's the fucking director of Florida tourism. They'd been down there for quite a while. That's where he met them and got started in the business. And I also, when he said, well, I don't think that Savage and Steamboat were trying to upstage my main event at WrestleMania 3. He's just full of himself. He's so full of himself that.
And then they go to Ricky, who says that they were.
Yes, and yeah, we were going to upstage them. Yeah, of course they were. And for in-ring work, it wasn't hard. For importance, that was the hill to climb. But
the Bubba the Love Sponge thing is so weird. Of all the people to go and find for this thing, like,
yes,
Natalia's weird. I mean, she has a little bit of a story because her dad worked there and he was friends with Randy, but she's an active wrestler. You can understand why they would get her. They had, what's his name? Curtis Hawkins or whatever his name was, say that he was a fan of his when he was a kid. I understand some of that. But to have Hogan and Bubba there, do they talk to each other?
Well, that's what I was going to say, because I mean, Bubba the Love Sponge could have only gotten on a show like this for any reason if Hulk Hogan had said, oh, yeah, you ought to talk. But they're on the outs, right? Because they sued each other because fucking Bubba's wife Bubba tried to ruin Hogan's life and career. So now they're both commenting on a show that Bubba the Love Sponge has nothing to do with the subject whatsoever, except that he was the facilitator and the channel for which Hogan used to fuck with Savage when Savage was mad at him. Who knows? Maybe they've all become Christians and they've forgiven each other. All I know, Bubba the Love Sponge looks like possibly a little bit more articulate Larry Flint.
Did you ever hear the rumor that, because, when Elizabeth debuted, she wasn't like the cowering woman. She was kind of a confident heel woman manager. She even cheated at one point in one of those early episodes that she was a manager on, although if you watch the documentary, they make it sound like she was the very first valet ever. No one had ever thought about doing something with their wife or girlfriend before, which, again, WWE history. But the rumor had been that Vince wanted Randy to have a valet, and the woman he originally had in mind before Randy said, no, my wife, was Julie Valentine, Greg Valentine's wife. Did you ever hear that?
Now that you've brought it up, I have heard that rumor, but I'd never heard it from any official source. I don't know. I have no idea. I do know that apparently Julie Valentine, isn't she the one that stooged on when she and Greg split up? She stooged on the boys bringing back tens of thousands of dollars from Japan in cash and not paying tax on it, and that fucked that whole thing up for everybody.
Maybe, I don't know.
I was told that somewhere around the early to mid 80s. I was told that story at one point. Yeah, they'd come back with 20 grand in their fucking fanny pack, and who knew, right? Somebody knew eventually.
Well, that was the Randy Savage biography on A&E.
Such as it was. Hey, I'm a huge Randy Savage fan. He was an incredible, unique talent. I was not as big of a fan of this program as I was the ones on Roddy and Austin, just because. And they have different directors doing them, so I guess we're going to get different takes on things. But this was just kind of all over the place to me. Little pitchy to me, dog.
All right, I kind of agree with you. Some nice clips, some, like you said, off-master, clearly ICW footage, including that one of Randy doing a promo about himself, which I had never seen before.
As a matter of fact, I remember that show because it was like Les Thatcher started the Personality Profile in Southeastern in Knoxville, and they stole a bit of that when basically for budgetary reasons, they'd have to sit down with one guy and do a long form thing and show clips. But I remember when they aired that, he was putting himself over and telling his entire history. And that was about 20 minutes of television. But we did also get covered the most important part of Randy Savage's huge media career, his rap album. His rap album was covered on this program. And folks, if you would, now that you are aware of that, because it was, when it was released originally, it went plywood. It almost made it to sheetrock. But now that it's been publicized on A&E, it's going to get over bigger than ever. They're going to re-release it, possibly a remastered edition. And you know how, Bryan, you ought to listen to Randy Savage's rap album on the Raycon earbuds.
That's right.
That's exactly right, folks. Whether it's for work or play, or whether you're working hard at playing hard, you're going to be on the move again this summer. All of you folks out there who want to go out in a pandemic-ridden society. So my advice to you is take your Raycons with you. That way, when the people with all the germs come up next to you, you can stick these things in your ears and you can try to feel better pulling yourself inward and hoping you don't get their germs. A pair of Raycon wireless earbuds in your ears can make all the difference, not in germs, but in sound. You get the powerful sound at half the price of other premium audio brands. They look great. They feel even better. They come in a range of cool colors. Got those customizable gel tips for the comfortable in-ear fit. You know those gel things, right? You just grease those things up and they'll go right. You're supposed to grease them, right?
No, I don't think so.
I put a little Crisco on them. I find they go in easier that way, but they're very comfortable. And the Raycons, folks, are built to go wherever you go. Quick, seamless Bluetooth pairing and a compact charging case. So right now, Raycon is offering 15% off all of their products for our listeners here. And here's all you got to do to get it. You go to buyraycon.com, BUYRAYCON.com/JCE, and you're going to get 15% off your entire Raycon order, even if you grab a pair and a spare. 15% off buyraycon.com/JCE.
Of course, Jim, you can listen to a lot of great songs with your Raycon earbuds.
That's right, you certainly can. But hey, this is your show.
That's right. I was going to say.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'm waiting here for you to take me in a direction. I've got nothing to do on this hot afternoon but to sit down and write you a line. I've been meaning to phone you. Go ahead.
What I was going to say is someone could be listening to a great question, potentially, using their Raycon earbuds here. And one that has come in all morning on Twitter and via email. I'll ask you one for everyone. I'm not completely caught up on these. Jim, what's going on with you and Matt Hardy and wife?
The House of Hardy is not hardly in love with Jim Cornette anymore. I hate to say that, but I don't know. Possibly it's something I said. Because people often say to me, hey, Jim, what do you think about so-and-so? And I often tell them, I don't know. Because I turned on my Twitter machine yesterday afternoon to retweet some of the YouTube clips that have been put out. So keep the fans apprised of what's going on our YouTube channel. And I don't follow Matt, but either somebody sent it to me or whatever. But there it is, big as Christmas. Matt was commenting to someone who had said something and basically said that, well, it's the same old thing. It's the people who don't adapt and change with the times are left behind. And I used to have respect for JC, but not so much his shock jock gig. Like they're back to the, he says all this stuff just to shock people, not because it's fucking true, and it's observably true and demonstrably true, and everybody with a lick of sense can see that it's true. I'm just trying to shock people. I'm a shock jock. Killing puppies. I'm for it. Call 888-555-1212 and talk back to me. Oh, blow me. So basically, I just wrote him back and said, Matt, unfortunately, with the dog and pony show that you guys seem to call wrestling these days, that's why I'm glad I'm done with the whole thing. And I can just give my opinions. And my opinion is I used to have respect for you before you began teleporting to other dimensions and changing clothes in a fucking ice machine. And then I went on about my day. Well, Matt's been trying to be nice and professional, but he'll say those who don't adapt and change stuff again, and JC, blah, 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 which once again, even many people on Twitter were intelligent enough and perceptive enough to tweet back, adapt and change is not always for the better, and some people choose not to fucking adapt and change if it makes them do stupid shit. And so Matt and I had a couple of back and forths, and I like Matt. I'm disappointed. I'll get to his better half in a minute, or his other half. But I'm not trying to promo Matt, but I'm not going to hide the fact that, I thought this was a guy who could make a difference in the way some of these fucking jacklegs think these days, and he's gone off the deep end worse than all of them. And everybody knows that I've had nothing but good things to say about Matt Hardy until the last year and a half when he joined the fucking Lollipop Guild of Wrestling and started teleporting himself and changing clothes underwater in a swimming pool and in ice machines, and became 5,000 years old and adopted a goddamn Bad Hammer Films accent and looks like a cross between Vincent Price and Beatrice Arthur or whatever the fuck he was doing. I've always said great things about Matt. Matt, of the two Hardys, I actually thought was the most business-minded. Matt's the guy. I brought Matt Hardy to Ring of Honor in what was 2011 or 2012, one or the other year. I've worked with Matt Hardy there. He was an invited superstar. You know who he was? He was Matt Hardy. And he'd been a top wrestling star for 15 years, and everybody knew who he was, except he was still only in his 30s, and he could go in the ring, and he was perfect for Ring of Honor to try to give those guys some experience, and I thought teach them something, and he did quite well. And working with him, it's not like that if Matt Hardy had said, I've got an idea for a promo or a match or a finish or whatever, that nobody was going to listen to him. Of course we would, and we did. I never gave him a script and said, Matt, here's your interview written down for you. We said, Matt, here's your match. Here's what you're talking about. Do your promo. Or on his matches, do you think we, like Savage and Steamboat, wrote out everything 1 foot in front of another for him to do? No. We booked him because he was Matt fucking Hardy. And he had matches. And he never said to any of us, hey, what about if I get thrown into the ice machine and come out as a different person? Or is there any way that I could teleport out of the ring magically? I would just disappear and come back in the lake of reincarnation? Or I don't ever remember him saying it might be a good idea in this match for one of these guys to fucking spear me off a goddamn forklift and give me brain damage. He never said he wanted to be 5,000 years old. He spoke in a North Carolina accent, not in a goddamn ambivalent British accent. He was Matt Hardy. And several years ago, I saw him at one of those fan fests and wrestling events that the big time wrestling was running in the Carolinas with the legend shows and the nostalgia shows. They sold out Spartanburg 2 or 3 times, 2,000 people apiece. They drew 1,000-something people in Raleigh. They were doing big gates in these towns in the Carolinas, old Crockett towns, with the rock and roll and the midnight reunion and me and Baby Doll and the Hardys. And I said, you know what? You guys are so over in North Carolina. Matt, you know everybody in the business. You used to run your own shows. Now that you've got a name, now that you're a legend, you make contacts with TV stations, with radio stations. Everybody, especially in Western North Carolina, everybody knows the Hardys. He could be the guy because he knows everybody in the business. He could book them, or he could represent another company running big shows in big buildings in the Carolinas that would draw because of the local publicity he could get and the names he could contact. I said, boy, you ought to have a fucking territory here set up. And what does he do? About 4 or 5 years later, again, he's teleporting himself to other dimensions and changing clothes in an ice machine, and somehow this is professional wrestling. And this was the natural evolution of what he's been doing for the past 20 years. What the fuck? So, yes, I've praised almost everything Matt Hardy has ever done until a year and a half ago. If he's disappointed in me now, not because I'm a shock jock, Matt. A shock jock. And hey, wait a minute. Let's get Baba Booey to make some prank phone calls. They can't stand it. They can't stand it that I don't like this shit, and I don't have to. And I don't want their fucking money because I don't need it. And I don't want to be involved in wrestling anymore because it's a goddamn joke. And they don't know how to combat this. And I'm going to tell everybody in no uncertain terms why I think they're wiping their feet on the wrestling business, because it offends me as a wrestling fan. But anyway, I felt that I would communicate to Matt exactly what the problem is, as if he didn't know. No, it's not because I'm a shock jock, Matt. And I appreciate you guys are, you got the smell of your own farts in cologne bottles now, and you think you can't do any wrong. But yeah, a lot of people agree with me. The people that used to watch wrestling, all those people that don't anymore. So you don't respect my current positions, and I don't respect what you've done with a great career. So nobody was saying, motherfucker, fuck you, hope you die. There were some pointed comments because he said something about me, and I said something back to him. I didn't even quote tweet. Is that what they call it? The quote tweet when they put it in the box? I didn't even quote tweet a couple of responses to him. I just responded to his individual tweet because I wasn't looking for news as much as just to let him know that I was as disappointed in him as he is in me. But there was still no fuck yous going on. However, she's had a habit of doing it in the past. I guess she just has to run and pick up for anybody anytime anybody says anything about Matt. But his lovely wife, who I've met, I believe, one time, who I don't know personally and didn't say anything about and wasn't speaking to, I believe she used to be in the wrestling business. She's the artist barely known as Reby Sky. She writes back and says, well, dog and pony show. Well, Cornette, I thought you'd like the circus. Most clowns do. See, I wasn't talking to her. And because I do have respect for what Matt Hardy has accomplished in the past, I responded to her as politely as possible. Chickadee, you don't know what you're doing here. I was talking to your husband. I wasn't talking to you, and you don't know me. So just stay out of it, because I don't play nice, and I don't really give a fuck. And that's it. And I haven't heard any response.
And that's it.
And if there's no response, there ain't gonna be no response, because I don't want people to be accusing me of saying horrible things about somebody's wife that's not involved in this. I haven't seen, if I see Reby Hardy teleporting, the most I've said, she was playing the piano for some reason that we couldn't figure out in one of their independent film productions. And I believe that's the most that I've critiqued of her. Until I see her teleporting or fucking engaging in song and dance routines on their television or whatever, and doing phony wrestling, I'm not going to go further with it. Or she said what she had to say and I said what I had to say, and we can leave it there. But the idea that if she continues to rattle me on Twitter that I will not. Here's the problem, though. I'd have to do research to really get deep down and personal and make her cry and or hate me forever and want me to die. I'd have to do research, and I don't have time because I don't know enough about her or anything she's ever done to be specifically particular, which I like to be when I take people apart. So to prevent me from having to do any other research and say a lot of horrible things about somebody I don't even fucking know, we can just leave each other alone. And I hope that's what happens. It would probably be more entertaining for many of the listeners if she didn't, but that's up to her. But what they're defending now as evolution of wrestling and as things evolve and you must adapt and change or be left out. Yeah, I'm left out on purpose because I don't want to be involved in this. As I've said before, if it became fashionable to eat cow shit, I'd have to stay unfashionable. I'm still not going to eat the cow shit. What can they not? Not the smog, but the smug at All Friends Wrestling is so thick that they can't realize that, no, this is not some revolutionary, groundbreaking shit. This is bad wrestling, booked badly, that not very many people are watching. And we're pointing out why. I can get as goddamn deep down and personal as you want to get. I'll get kicked off a variety of social media platforms. I don't give a fuck. It would give me more free time with my day. But nobody is going to give me any goddamn smart-ass comment and not hear something back, unless I either don't hear it or actually just consider them so unimportant that I don't have time to comment. This falls into cracks somewhere in between.
Shock jock.
Shock jock.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to say this, because at the end, his argument became, you're not changing with the times, and you pointed out, well, there's a difference between growing with the times, changing with the times, and just desperately trying to latch on to something. There's a difference. And he came back with the whole you're a shock jock thing, and you're only talking about, or you're only, in quotes, I think it was hate. You're only hating AEW because you need to. For the record, almost every single month, the videos that get the most views, WWE. Or WWE-centered personalities, or people who just left WWE and end up in AEW.
Or wrestling history.
Or wrestling history.
Any number of things.
No, but the point is, it's not like these AEW... It's not like that's the stuff that does the best, for us. And you can kind of track their trajectory, too, with the level of interest people have in certain wrestlers and certain clips. And other than when Matt Hardy debuted and a few of the stupid things he's been involved with, the bottom of the others list in terms of video priorities that we put up. But he wants to defend his work, and I understand.
But remember, I defended his work. Remember when that fucking, who's that moron that was running Impact for, you told me his name here when I asked that question to you the last time. Ed Nordholm.
Ed Nordholm.
And I met him, and he was a nice enough guy, but he didn't have a complete clue of what he was doing in the wrestling business. And when I came down there, that's just when in 2017, that's just when they tried to fuck Matt around and sue him over his gimmick. I remember I never watched the whole TNA Broken Hardy thing because I figured if I did, I would start disliking the Hardys quicker than I did because it'd be some phony bullshit.
You would have.
But I did take Matt Hardy's side when I said they shouldn't sue a guy to try to take away a gimmick that he created for himself. That's bullshit, and that's the complete antithesis of the way you run the wrestling business, or the wrestling business should be run. And when Jeff Jarrett introduced me to Ed Nordholm, he made mention of saying, oh, so I'm the idiot that doesn't know anything about wrestling. I said, hello, Ed. Yes, apparently you are. But I was on Matt's side for that, and that's when that Ed Nordholm said, "Oh, that boy, I sure got a tongue lashing from old Reby Hardy about all of that." I'm sorry. Actually, how many times have I apologized in the last year and a half for ever saying something good about X? Because all it is a disappointment when they turn out to be an idiot also. You can't let go of the spotlight. You can't fucking stand up for your principles. You can't tell some guy, CM Punk did. That's the quote that should be reverberating around the wrestling business these days. I don't want to be another guy doing bad television. So everybody else, for whatever reason, just went, oh, sure, we'll just goddamn have football field fuckery. And hey, it'd be great if so-and-so was burned alive and reincarnated or whatever the fuck. But I'm going to be over here taking a piss out of all of it because I'm offended on a personal basis. And I've reached a point in my personal life where I don't have to do dick all the shit I don't want to do except sign action figures and put up with the goddamn morning post office traffic. Everything else, I'm free to do what I want. And I want to tell some people when they're doing some bad, stupid, silly, phony fucking wrestling. Because that's all the enjoyment we've got left.
Can't believe you haven't accepted the genius of big money Matt Hardy and his stable.
I forgot.
Who don't notice him winking to the camera that I gave them a bad deal. Don't say anything.
Yeah, I forgot about after changing clothes in an ice machine. There's really not much you can do to top that on the stupid scale. But how about being the world's worst manager by actually telling people while you're doing it that you're screwing your fucking proteges? And then obviously winking and laughing like that everybody knows this is all horse shit and we're just doing the story that our amateur booker came up with. The fuck? Is that the way that all these people that have had a name and show up on this goddamn show want to be remembered for doing silly shit with a bunch of kids on television? Fuck.
And you and I have always had a different way of seeing Matt Hardy. And I think something that just happened in real time kind of...
I apologize.
Well, no, what I was going to say...
People say I never apologize. I apologize to you for seeing what you didn't see in Matt Hardy.
Well, it's even beyond that, because what I was going to say, where you and I traditionally have disagreed, is SportsCenter, ESPN SportsCenter. This segment is sponsored by SportsCenter. SportsCenter tweeted out, who is your favorite wrestler growing up? And all of a sudden, everyone's jumping in with answers. Jeff Hardy just trended for this tweet. Who is your favorite wrestler growing up? And people have all sorts of Jeff Hardy tales. No one says Matt Hardy. He was Jeff's brother. I like Robert Gibson. I never wanted to see a singles run of Robert Gibson after 1990. And I'm not even, I hate to compare Matt Hardy to Robert Gibson. That's not fair. But Jeff was the star. Matt may have had a better head. Matt may have had a better potential booking mind, but he's just Jeff Hardy's brother doing wacky fucking shit.
I stand chastised, and that's what I always said. I said, Jeff has the charisma and is the flashy guy, but Matt's the anchor. He's the stable guy. He's the booking mind, the business mind. I can see him being a promoter. Whatever. I apologize for all of that.
Him and his wife are like the Brandy and Cody of whatever wrestling trauma films are that they make.
Well, I was about to say, they can't even be the Brandy and Cody in AEW because they already have Brandy and Cody. So we're going to have another fucking situation where the obnoxious wife comes in to fucking horn in on some camera time, or, can she just play the piano in the barn? I don't know.
But Mr. Shock Jock, it's time for our next segment. Show me your tits.
Well, all right, Brian, if you insist, here you go. Hey!
No, but all kidding aside, I would have to think after the little bit of a beating you gave Matt Hardy on Twitter and the fear of a potential beating or beating is probably not the right word to use here, but a potential.
I'd back up on that transit. What about spanking? A little paddling.
A spanking, maybe.
A spanking.
A spanking. Maybe she fears a spanking from you. Maybe not necessarily a spanking overall, but from you. She fears this spanking.
Hey, I'll tell you one thing. You should not fear a spanking from me because I am one of the most talented spankers that you'll ever come across. But nevertheless, perhaps she fears...
I can't... This transition's over.
He fears a spanking, but I'll tell you one thing. Right now, stop it back there, you... filled with the tomfoolery and the shenanigans. Regardless of who's spanking who afterwards, if you got a sore ass, you need to take care of it. And if you've got anything else sore, aches and pains from arthritis, backaches, muscle soreness, joint pain, you want to try a drug-free solution. Drug-free solutions are always the best one, except when you're watching a bad wrestling program. Then try a solution involving drugs. But a drug-free solution for pains from all those things that I mentioned is, of course, the Omax CryoFreeze. CryoFreeze CBD Pain Relief Roll-On is an all-natural topical pain reliever that instantly ices out the pain with a 1-2 punch of super cold menthol and hemp CBD. We've talked about it. It's the roll-on. You roll it on your back, your neck, your hands, any other painful areas. If you've just had your ass reamed verbally, do not roll this stuff on your sphincter. It will cause inflammation there, but everywhere else it reduces inflammation and improves muscle and joint flexibility. And right now, Omax is offering my listeners 20% off a 1-month supply of Omax CryoFreeze or anything else on the site, any product site-wide. If you go to Omax, O-M-A-X, OmaxHealth.com and enter the code DRIVE, 20% off a 1-month supply of CryoFreeze or anything on the site. And I'm telling you, we've talked about all of our family members. My mother-in-law has had a hip replacement, knee replacement. She loves the stuff. Everybody uses this. It works almost instantly. No messy creams, no stinky fragrances, just some menthol. It'll help your sinuses at the same time. Roll it over where it hurts and ice out the pain. OmaxHealth.com. If your lips are chapped from kissing ass, this won't help you either.
All right, well, let's now kindly transition to our next question. Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Ryan in Regina, or is it Regina?
It's Regina.
Regina.
It rhymes with... It rhymes with pussy.
Saskatchewan.
Nothing rhymes with Saskatchewan.
Jim and Bryan, I can't read this. It happened again, where I because of what caused me to laugh, the question becomes completely inappropriate.
Wait a minute, no, ask this inappropriate question. We're just going to, because we don't preview these folks, so sometimes we may have said something that inadvertently would cast a different tone to the proceedings. But no, ask this question, and we'll approach this in a dignified and professional manner.
That's right. That previous intro was for the deep cut, but this question, Jim, was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Ryan in Regina, Saskatchewan. Mick Foley came out and said that WWE needs a woman's-only brand and should do so before AEW does. Jim has come out and said that women are good for wrestling, but not for an entire show. I think a woman's-only show results in top things. I guess he meant two things. In two things. One, that if ratings drop, okay, this is starting to go off the rails. If ratings drop, there will be backlash about wrestling fans being sexist and biased towards women. And two, that by launching this woman's-only brand, it would be seen as more of a politically correct movement and not a talent-based move. I have countered that a tag team-only brand would benefit. All right, I'm done with the question from Ryan. Jim, have you seen this Mick Foley?
You need to play the whole intro there, or else they won't understand why I'm laughing as soon as the question from Regina that rhymes with whatever is about the all-women's. Yeah, that was great.
I have the tweet here just to clarify whatever he was trying to say there. I don't know if there's much of a language barrier between Saskatchewan and the Northeast. I don't know what the problem is, but Mick Foley tweeted out on April 30th, 12:56 p.m., "Dear Vince, an all-women's brand needs to happen in WWE unless you want AEW to beat you to the punch.
Yes!
Sincerely, Mick." And then
I think that Vince is holding the door open waiting for AEW to beat him to that punch. Here, you go first. No, there wouldn't be any backlash if the show didn't work. Otherwise, it'd be taken off the air because nobody was watching it. So then people would say, well, all the fans are sexist. No, they're not watching the fucking shows they're producing right now. So if you take all the male stars off of it and just put the female stars on it, you think more people are going to watch it then? I love Mick. He's way too nice a human being. And no, I think the LPWA proved back in 1990 that nobody wants to see an all-female wrestling program, except the female wrestlers. But no, Jesus Christ, nobody's watching the shows now. So take half the cast off and see what happens. Does that make any sense? And seriously, I know, and in a perfect world, it rains lemonade, and there are no Republicans, and everybody likes women's wrestling just like men's wrestling. But realistically, and in the actual world we live in, no. We've got down to a base of viewers where the men like the women's wrestling as much as the men's wrestling, which is part of the problem. I could understand if it was all young girls that wanted to grow up and be like their favorite superhero girl wrestlers, but it's a bunch of fucking guys as older as these fucking female wrestlers are, with their favorite girl wrestler's profile picture on Twitter, and the goddamn somehow figured into their handle or their name. And I mean, the overall, again, pussification of pro wrestling has led to guys being bigger fans of girl wrestling than they are of guy wrestling, which then somebody's going to say, but Jim, doesn't that contradict your point about why wouldn't they just then have a girl show? And the answer is, because I didn't say there was a lot of these people. I just said some of them, that's what they're doing. And I apologize that pro wrestling is a business that exists solely as testosterone-driven badass men punching each other in the face and committing heinous acts of physical violence. That's what it is, and that's what draws. And that's what it's always been. That's what's always going to draw. That's why Stone Cold Steve Austin drew more than anybody else, and that's why today's programs draw less than everybody else. Prove me wrong.
That's why I'd be curious about how it would do. If they had a 2-hour show once a week that was nothing but the women's roster, I would really love to see how that would do, one way or the other. If it does good, that tells you something. If it doesn't do good, that tells you something. If the other show doesn't change at all, that tells you something. I mean, I would actually like to see it as an experiment. I'd like to see them do that.
I think the other show wouldn't change at all, and that show would have almost as many people watching it as the other show, because it'd be the same people, just not quite as many of them. But I would love to see AEW start that all women's program first, because my God, talk about a comedian's dream when a president gets elected that's a bumblefuck. Yeah, we would have to watch that every week and pray that it would be live. But I like Mick. I've said this many times before, he's too nice and polite a human being for the wrestling business.
Plus, it's one thing to make the point on Twitter and just say, I think WWE should do this before AEW does. The whole pretending like Vince is, on Twitter, like, oh, Mick tweeted at me. Let me see what this is. I should start a women's division. Before
I would think
AEW.
Vince has got to have somebody that does his tweeting for him, right? And I'm not saying this. Well, not possibly. And I'm not even saying that like I'm making fun of Vince for being old. I do not know. If you held a gun to me, put a smartphone in my hand and said tweet, I'll just shoot, save us both some time. We'll get to the fucking meat of the matter. I'm not saying that Vince McMahon, who is this billionaire that runs this major company, has not figured out how in the last, 20 years that I haven't been around him that much, how to use a smartphone to tweet. I'm just saying that I can't see the man that I knew taking time to fucking pick up the phone and tweet. I can see him picking up the phone, calling the office 17 times a day to ask whatever question. But I can't see Vince McMahon say, I need to get this thought out to the public. So I'm pretty sure he's like a lot of the other guys. There's some of the older guys that actually tweet. Some people retweet them and say, look, so-and-so thinks the same way I do. And they don't know they've got some fucking jack off that tweets for them because they don't know how to do it. And that's a lot more of the older guys than one might think.
All right, well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mark Powell in Bakersfield, California. Watching part 1 of the Vice Dark Side of the Ring episode on Brian Pillman, my question to you is, where do you rank the Hollywood Blondes among the all-time top tag teams, and what could they have accomplished had WCW not ended their run so quickly?
Well, let me say, first of all, that during the period of time that Austin and Pillman were teaming up as the Hollywood Blondes, I was in Knoxville running Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I was keeping an eye on WWF and I think I'd probably just started with WWF at that point in time, or somewhere around that same time period. But I would tape all the programs and at least zip through, see what was going on. And Pillman and Austin as the Hollywood Blondes is one of the only things on WCW television at that point that I would actually stop and watch. If Flair was doing something that, or whatever, a friend of mine, if Bobby had a showcase every so often, but Austin and Pillman, I'd watch them every time. Where do they rank on the list of all-time great tag teams? They don't, because they only left them together for 6 months. I mean, when you've got everybody from the Grahams and the Fargos to Bockwinkel and Stevens and blah, 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 I don't think that I would say to Steve Austin to his face, you didn't rank as one of the great tag teams because they didn't leave you alone long enough. If they'd been together a few years, they might very well have. What they could have done, we don't know. The whole company was ailing, but they would have had better tag team matches than anybody that they replaced them with or anybody that came beforehand, because while they were together, they were having better tag team matches than anybody that came after or before. They clicked as personalities together, and they were putting work into it. You could tell where all the other guys were just going out there doing the same old shit. They were motivated. So I loved the team. The team's not an all-time great team because they weren't together that long and barely really did anything, but they could have if they'd left them together. But if they'd left them together, then that would have changed the course of wrestling history if Austin had stayed and not gone through that whole thing. So it probably worked out best in the end. It worked out best for both guys because, I mean, it was WCW. They were one, change in administration away from being fired or let go or released or buried or pushed or whatever at all times in that company. Whereas Pillman was able to get out of there and get the spot that, the big paying spot that he had wanted from Vince. But by that time, the wreck had happened, but Austin definitely prospered. So they probably shouldn't have stayed together in WCW. They would have both been not doomed, but definitely not as successful as they were for the next few years. And they wouldn't have been doing documentaries about Bryan. Well, probably either.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Jacked Up Jeremy Bagley. Jim, Bret Hart strikes again.
What?
Bret Hart strikes again in an interview with the Whatever the 81 podcast is. Bret expounded on Triple H's legacy. Quote, "There's always some guys, that no matter what they do with them, you always wonder how they got there. And I never thought Triple H had an original idea for anything. And I always thought he was overrated." This is so Bret. This is so Bret. The only reason people even know him or remember him today is because of Daddy-in-law. Back to Jeremy. Does Bret have a valid point here? Or is he just saltier than mermaid pussy?
Oh. Well, there you go from Regina in Saskatoon. No, we've talked about Triple H, I thought, in the era where he was in the main events on a regular basis, he was the guy that worked with the guy that drew the money. Triple H and Austin. Triple H and Foley, Triple H and fucking Taker, Triple H whatever. Is it true or is it not true a statement that most wrestling fans, when they name the all-time greats of that era of the WWF, they will go Austin, Rock, Taker, Foley. It'll be a few more before they get to Triple H. He was not the top money-drawing guy that was so over and was selling all that merch. But he filled a valuable role in that he was the guy that worked with the guy that drew the money.
Yeah, I was going to say, but he was treated that way.
He was pushed like he was that guy, yes. And that's another reason that you can tell that he was never that guy. Because he was pushed like it, but he wasn't. You can tell the difference. That's not knocking him. A lot of people didn't get that far. He was a good worker. He was in shape. Even though the DX stuff and the whole curtain call and the whole 9 yards and exposing the business and etc., he still, my God, he was serious as a heart attack compared to the people you see these days. And he did study the business. He does have a mind for it. And obviously, besides the fact that he, was very serendipitous in his romantic entanglements, he's also worked at a high level in a variety of positions there. He means more behind the scenes and in the business than he ever did to me in the ring now. And that's not knocking him as a shitty talent, just he wasn't one of the all-time greats. Even if he was a great worker, he wasn't a great overworker. So you can't really bury him for being, he wasn't George Goulas, for fuck's sake, right? So, I could kind of see with Bret, he wasn't, Triple H was not over at the level that Bret was in the ring as a star, internationally or domestically. So Bret could still look down at him on that, but there probably is a little saltiness because, Bret's like, but this guy that I was better than ended up a lot richer than me because of who he married and the opportunities he got. And he probably still remembers all the DX childish shenanigans, which doesn't color his memory of Mr. Helmsley any better. So I can see both. I can see both sides.
See, I like it. Whenever we see something that's a quote from Bret Hart, he's just going to tell the truth. He's going to tell you exactly what the truth is.
How come? But here's the thing. How come nobody says Bret's bitter and just wants a job?
Well, they do call him bitter. Some people do call him bitter.
Well, but nobody says he wants a job.
No, he's having a good life.
Yeah. And so what the fuck? When is the cutoff? How much older is Bret than me? Is he fucking 6, 7 years older? How old do I have to get before people say, well, he doesn't want a job, he's just grumpy?
I don't know. I was looking up Bret Hart's age, actually.
Okay. Now that I'd like to hear that now.
63 years old.
Shit.
You catching up?
He's only 3.5 years older than me. Okay, well then sooner or later then, they're going to start saying, well, yeah, Cornette's just grumpy and bitter, but at least he doesn't want a job.
Well, Jim, our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com, is from Rick in Yorkville, Illinois. I recently came across a clip on YouTube where Bret Hart said that Triple H had it in for The Rock during his early days in the WWE. Bret said that Triple H hated The Rock and wanted to ruin him. This was around the time that The Rock had won the Intercontinental Championship, with Bret thinking that Triple H wanted to keep him, being Bret, away from the world title picture. Is there any truth to this? Also, did Triple H try using his influence to get other wrestlers buried on the roster during this period?
Oh, boy. I'm not going to try to read his mind. I wasn't sitting there asking, because after the curtain call, we spoke when we needed to, Triple H and myself, along with the rest of them. I spoke to him when I had to. So I wasn't sitting there asking him, hey, what do you think about that Rocky over there? I don't know who was mad at who. I can see Triple H not liking the idea of that, because you could see just the fucking charisma dripping off Rock, and you could see the potential. I wasn't the only one that called Vince up after that first workout that day and said, hey, in 5 years, this guy's going to be your champion. And he made it in 3. Everybody knew he was going to be a fucking star. And the only reason that he wasn't, and it probably worked to his advantage in the end, Rocks, the only reason he wasn't more quickly is because they gave him that, the whole kid and play smiley haircut thing and the tassels and pushed him down people's throats as a babyface till where it backlashed, and then he got to be a little bit more of himself. But they weren't going to give up on Dwayne Johnson. He was going to be a star. It just depended on how long it took. So I can see where Triple H is already, in 96, he was supposed to be the king of the ring, and he did something stupid because he was hanging out with the wrong people who didn't caution him against doing that, when they should have known that he was the one that was going to get punished because 2 of them were leaving and the other one was the champion. So then he didn't win the King of the Ring, and it cost him 6 figures that year. And now he's, coming up with the DX thing and trying to be bigger, and here's this goddamn guy that's going to be a star. I can see where there might be jealousy. I don't want to accuse him of any active burial of Rock because I don't fucking know. And I was not at that point in their social games.
Okay, well, a lot of people think because of some of these tactics that were used, some in 2021 may call them bullying tactics, that The Rock may have years of repressed feelings about everything that he had to experience in those early months after he got there from Triple H and Shawn Michaels. The Rock may want to consult with an attorney to deal with the trauma that he has to live with on a daily basis because of his treatment at the hands of Triple H, and I say it again, Shawn Michaels.
You know what? Actually, what he might want to do is he might want to call some of them Hollywood writers that's working on Young Rock and see if they could come up with a better segue than what was just spit out there just totally off the top of your head. And I'll tell you what, if you need a lawyer, if you need to sue somebody, if you need your rights stood up for in open court, and if you need a wrestling event in Beckley promoted, whatever you need, you can call this man.
Call Stephen P. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. He'll sue the rest.
Yes, folks, no matter what the egregious example of greed or avarice is that has caused you to or your family members to be harmed, whether it's the diddling doctors at the Veterans Administration, whether it's the people that poison people at these big corporations, whether it is the defective earplugs that somebody's going to pay big money for giving them to our servicemen, and 3M, maybe those people that I spoke of, no matter what it is, or if it's the big upcoming wrestling event in Beckley, West Virginia later on this year that's going to be promoted by All Star Wrestling and Gary Damron with newlawoffice.com is an official sponsor. No matter what it is, you call the man, Stephen P. New, at newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. As we have mentioned, he could not accept the medical malpractice case in Nigeria. However, if you are in the continental United States, then Stephen can either help you or tell you where to go to get some help. Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. And as I mentioned, and we're getting details on this, it's going to be later on this year, details emerging as they come out, but there's going to be a big all-star wrestling event. Gary is stepping out of Madison, West Virginia, and going to the big city of Beckley with the big event at the Beckley Raleigh County Civic Center. Of course, the same place that the famous incident involving the Midnight Express took place in 1987 that led to my first meeting with Stephen P. New at I believe it was the Charlotte Fan Fest or one of those in the Carolinas, when he brought me copies of the West Virginia legal textbooks that contain the Midnight Express lawsuit from Beckley and the findings from same in that self-same textbook. And we're going to have more details on that wrestling event. I do not get up false hope, folks. I will be enjoying it from afar. No shows this year, as we mentioned on the drive-thru or on the experience this past week, and possibly no shows ever again. But I'll be pulling for them in spirit here in Beckley this summer. Anyway, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084.
Hey, any update on when you're getting your shot?
Well, now the thing is, Stacey's having to wait to make the appointment because she wants to make me an appointment on the day that she's going to get her second shot. But they're wanting her to make an appointment before that for me if you go to the thing. So she's waiting until the time is at where she can make an appointment for that day and we can both go together. Right. But that is up. But as I've said before, I'm still. Oh, hold on. God damn it. Hold on. I'll be right back. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. I don't know what's going on here. We've heard this before. Sometimes Jim is going for a book, sometimes a magazine or a program. You never know what miscellaneous items will be lying around Castle Cornette, especially in the office of Jim Cornette and the vault of Cornette's collectibles. Paper has been found.
Paper has been found. I told you. They gave you a card that said you'd got your shot, right? Well, they gave Stacy this 6-page pamphlet. What you need to know before you get this vaccine. COVID-19 disease is caused by a coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2. This type of coronavirus has not been seen before. You can get COVID-19 through contact with another person who has the virus. It is predominantly a respiratory illness that can affect other organs. It gives you the symptoms, etc. And she got the Pfizer vaccine, the first shot. And it clearly states the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is an unapproved vaccine that may prevent COVID-19. There's no FDA-approved vaccine to prevent COVID-19. They repeat this about 18 times in this. It's been authorized for emergency use. And basically, they're guaranteeing nothing here. They're guaranteeing nothing. So
it's like a WWE contract.
Exactly. It's all for them. There's a remote chance that it could cause a severe allergic reaction. But anyway, the point is, there's 6 pages here that says that they're not guaranteeing anything, but this will probably help you. So I'm definitely going to get it because every little bit helps. But as far as going out in public around other human beings, especially people that are not wearing masks, that's going to be quite a ways down the road for me in the future. I see everyone as a potential malignant, infectious organism.
Well, Jim, speaking of vaccinations, let's get to our next question. Sent to CornyDriveThru at Gmail.
Okay, is that question about vaccinations? Because then that transition doesn't work either. Segway King.
Well, here's the question. Sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Richard in Eastbourne, UK.
Well, hello, Dick.
Hello, Jim and Bryan. I'm relatively new to this podcast and have read Jim's dislike for Jake Roberts. Can you please explain why that is, please? Speaking of vaccinations, Jake Roberts.
Well, now, how has he picked up on my supposed dislike for Jake Roberts and not your absolute complete detestation and disdain for Jake Roberts?
Well, he was a good promo. I'll say some nice things.
I say lighthearted things about Jake and some of the antics that he's been involved in the past. And I've told the story on how I'm not the only person by any stretch of the imagination that he bailed on with no notice, but I haven't just dug in and said that Jake ought to be boiled in oil and have his fat sold for soap. I know there's quite a bit of steam between you and Mr. Roberts because of the way he treated Jerry Gray, a cancer patient who Jake owed a ton of money and refused to pay back.
For the record, Jake has screwed over multiple people I'm friends with.
I didn't say that.
From you to John Arezzi to Jerry Gray, everyone. I was at an autograph appearance with Jake Roberts in the summer of '93 that John Arezzi set up on the island at L&S Comics in North Merrick. And they had a line around the building. Kids and their moms all there on this Saturday morning to meet Jake the Snake. A little over a year off WWF TV, a few months off WCW TV, still in relatively okay shape. It's Jake the Snake. He showed up so fucked up, he couldn't lift his head up. There were kids. You should have seen the faces on these kids and their parents. You know who saved the day? The Power Twins. The world-famous Power Twins. They showed up, saw how fucked up Jake Roberts was, and decided they would be nice to people for a few minutes. And they start talking to people. It was a disaster. And it was just one of many disasters with Jake. It's what I witnessed, but he screwed over so many people I know. With that said, in the Randy Savage documentary, Nice Jake is funny to watch. Like the whole, when you know he's turning it on, you know, the whole nice guy, like, I didn't see him do steroids, but I figure he did. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Manners.
Well, now let me ask you this. This is a brand new biography of Randy Savage. Jake was sitting down to do it. Could it have been they started a year ago? Okay.
His hair, right?
His hair
yeah.
wasn't Bill Dundee black, but it was brown everywhere. Hair, beard, mustache, whatever. And now he's grayer than Gandalf. What? Did he just do that just to be on A&E, but he didn't give a fuck about Weekly on TNT? What happened there? It looked like Jake from 10 years ago.
I have no idea. He still sounds like... How does that happen? Him and Vince are the two guys that their voices have completely changed.
Well, I can guarantee you Vince's is not from smoking crack.
You guarantee this?
I guarantee that. See everything I left out there?
Yeah, you left out a lot.
See everything I left out? Vince's voice did not change from smoking too much crack.
So, to answer this question, are you denying? You're saying you have no problems at all with Jake Roberts?
No, I just said, how was it phrased? That your hatred for... I'm ambivalent either way as to whether Jake should be boiled in oil and have his fat sold for soap. It's not a fresh wound. We got past it. We got the belt back on the dirty white boy in Bluefield, West Virginia, and we moved on with that. So it was a pain in the ass having to ferry Jake's non-driver's license having ass around Stamford and Greenwich. Those times he was on the creative team because I was the one chosen to pick him up and drop him off.
If someone called you up, a friend of yours, and said, Jim, you can't talk me out of it. I'm promoting a wrestling show. Would you suggest booking Jake?
Well, now that doesn't make sense.
I guess not. He's not wrestling.
Called me and said, you can't book me. You can't talk me out of it. I'm running a wrestling show and I'm going to book Jake the Snake. Well, already he's prefaced, you can't talk me out of this, so why am I going to try? So, okay, it's your funeral.
All right.
But
indeed a funeral.
If someone just said, I'm going to run a wrestling show, who should I book? I think Jake would probably be down in the 300 or 400s choice before, right before Hitler, Saddam Hussein, and Twinkle Toes McFingerbang.
All right, well, let's get another question here before we wrap things up and play a song or two on the way out. This next one, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. It does not appear. John, I guess would be the name here. I would like to hear your thoughts on the reveal that Chris Jericho came up with the idea for the Blood and Guts parley from Pirates of the Caribbean.
What?
Reveals like this are hardly surprising for AEW at this point, but it's always a treat to hear Jim's comments on them, and I have an article that was sent to me here.
But wait, because I've not seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean. I know it's a movie and I know it's a Disney ride. But did they have a parley?
I haven't watched those movies either. So
I've looked parley up in the American Heritage Dictionary to determine its meaning, but maybe it was in this movie.
Well, here's an article from the website Wrestling Inc. by Eric Mutter.
Now, wait a minute. Is that no good Mutter again?
Hello, Mutter.
Hello, Mutter. Here I am at Camp Granada.
AEW's Chris Jericho sat down with Arda Orcal of Sports Nation to talk both wrestling and hockey. In an interview that will be released next week, in a teaser you could see below, Jericho revealed the inspiration for the Parley segment seen this past week on AEW Dynamite, building up to the Blood and Guts match. Quote, "We've never heard that word before in wrestling," Jericho said of the word parlay.
Or in the English language.
I got it from Pirates of the Caribbean. I had to Google it. What is it called? I was like the real Captain Jack Sparrow.
Oh, boy.
Parsley? Parsnip? Parley? It's parley. What is a parley? That's where
Who is a parley? Let me clarify this.
That's where you get the head of the two armies that meet before the battle to discuss the terms. You see it in Game of Thrones quite often. The two horses ride off, and they talk and ride back to their armies, and thousands of people go and kill each other.
But wait a minute, Brian. Has one of those armies previously busted into the other army's locker room and beat them all up and flushed the general's head down the toilet, and then they go have the parley? Did that part come first in Pirates of the Caribbean or wherever?
I don't believe it has, but here's a few more quotes from Jericho. Jericho noted that the idea of the segment without physicality intrigued him.
Was to get ratings for no apparent reason, just to get a rating.
So I thought, can we actually do a promo segment that actually has no physicality and no run-ins? Sure we can, Jericho said. By the way, that's the way the business was done for years. Of course you can.
The whole idea is to do those and then don't. Not do those all the time. Don't do those and then do it. Not to do those all the time and then don't.
Even Max at first was like, well, should I punch this guy? Punch this guy? No physicality. It's just right down to business. As Pat Patterson used to say, we know that we have the match next week. The match is made. There's no reason to fight until then. You just tell each other how much you're going to fight each other, how much you hate each other, and what you're going to do to each other, which builds up the anticipation and the desire to see this match. And I think we've done a great job of doing that. End quote.
And people hear stuff that smart people say, but they don't process it properly. Pat Patterson was exactly correct. If this was a big main event title match or even a tag team match, and especially if the guys involved had not basically run over each other with cars, tried to end their careers, and then humiliated the other guy by flushing his head and doing all the stuff they did to each other, and there's 10 of them. And you have all 10 guys standing in the ring with their own microphones and no authority, announcer, guy running the show, anybody to keep it non-physical. They put the cart before the horse. Can you imagine? You can see Austin and Rock having a face-to-face in the middle of the ring, prefacing their pay-per-view match without getting in a fight. I don't think you can see it the same way with the same people if Austin has hospitalized and nearly sodomized The Rock 3 weeks ago, and then you put them in the ring face to face and they're just talking. You see are we following a shooting with a stabbing? Are we then following murder and arson with pickpocketing and mopery?
Yeah, it shouldn't be we don't touch each other after we flush your head down the toilet. It should be we don't touch each other until I finally get my chance to try to flush your head down the toilet.
There you go. By the way, nobody ever gets charged with mopery anymore. That's a shame. That's a wonderful charge to put on somebody just to fuck with them. Also, gawking.
And by the way, I won the other day on the show. I told you, I bet you that the word parley, that smells of Chris Jericho. And I was 100% right.
There you go.
He was at home. He was watching TV. Maybe enjoying an adult beverage or two. Saw Pirates of the Caribbean on TV and said, "Oh, there's a word that no one in wrestling has ever used, for good reason, but no one in wrestling has ever used. I'm going to use it there."
Hey, we all used to research wonderful ideas off TV and movies. Jerry Jarrett came up with a scaffold match off that Gladiator movie, whatever. You just need to know what parts to pick and where to put them and who to put them on.
Well, Jim, let's get at least one more question here on the show before we wrap things up. And I'm trying to find
that sounds like a thinly disguised threat. At least one more.
At least, well, again, sometimes at the end of the show, I ask you a question and 2-word answer. Can't end on that note. It's unfair.
When's the last time that I gave a 2-word answer?
I don't know.
When is the last time? When you ask me what time it is, I tell you how to build the watch.
Well, I still haven't found a good question. Well, here's one. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru.
Charlie was busy this week?
I will find the Charlie question for you. We'll end on that in a moment after this one.
Oh, goddamn it.
Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jason in Little Rock, Arkansas. Recently, I listened to Bruce Pritchard tell a story about how he met you and how he was later involved in your first wedding. He mentioned he attended your bachelor party. When asked about the festivities, Bruce claimed that rather than engaging in a night of crude debauchery, a group of about 5 or 6 guys sat in a hotel room and watched wrestling matches. Is this true, Jim? No drinking, no drugs, no scantily clad women walking around? I find it very hard to believe that a man who spends his nights with a group of friends in fur coats by the dumpsters of the Greenville Memorial Auditorium would settle for such a lame alternative for a bachelor party.
Lame? No, here's the thing. Debauchery was every night on the road. This was special. I had Weasel Dooley in, Dennis Coralluzzo came down, Frank Chili, Bruce came over from Houston because it was in Dallas, because that's where my first wife's family was.
Didn't Bruce come over with Paul Bosch?
Yeah, well...
Did he attend the bachelor party since they were in town?
No,
okay.
Paul, I don't know whether they rode in the same car. Bruce came in early, but Paul Bosch did come, yes, because Bruce had told him that I was getting married, and he asked if he could come. And I said, of course, Paul Bosch can come. And Valerie came with him, and they brought Joey. Joey played the piano. But I wasn't going to, ask Paul Bosch, nor would he probably have wanted to come to my bachelor party, where I didn't see those. I saw Dennis and Frank once a month in Philly. And I didn't see Bruce that much at that point in time at all. And I didn't see Weasel because he was in Louisville, didn't see him so it was a number of guys that I didn't see very often. Well, fuck, I'm on the road messing around every night. But for this particular, festivity, we got several VCRs and a bunch of wrestling tapes and sat there and had an enjoyable time watching wrestling tapes. And I didn't drink. None of that bunch was big drug users or whatever. There was a female acquaintance of mine in one of the rooms in that hotel, just in case somebody got bored for a period of time, but there was no big falderall going on.
There was just a woman waiting for someone to get bored?
Well, she didn't have to wait too long, but
Bruce was looking for drugs.
Bruce apparently was looking for drugs. I don't know. I didn't know that he was taking them marijuana pills at the time.
Did you have any other bachelor parties?
No. What do you mean any other What was
You've
that?
been married more than once.
Party tour? Oh, you mean? I thought you meant then, like there was multiple ones.
That's a great idea, by the way. I gotta say.
Well, no, because the rest of the bloom was off at that point. I wasn't going to wear white, and so there you have it.
All right. Well, Virgin Princess, let's get our final question this week here on the show. Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Charlie in Starkville, Mississippi.
All right, I should have known.
I actually searched for his name, so I have several options here for questions. We'll go to this one. Chris Jericho recently said,
"Good Lord, these names keep coming, the same names all the time. Why doesn't anybody ask me about Fazzle Dean?"
Chris Jericho recently said that AEW is making stars and the WWE isn't anymore. Jericho said, quote, "We've made Darby Allin into a legit main event draw.
Oh boy.
I give us full Barry Horowitz pat on the back because we set out to do it and we did it." What are your thoughts on Jericho's take on AEW building stars versus the WWE?
Well, this is not even knocking Darby Allin, but yes, more people know who Darby Allin is now because he's on television, and a year and a half ago he wasn't. But how do they even know whether somebody's a main event star since there's no fans buying any tickets? And in what place have they put Darby Allin that he has performed at a level they can say, well, he's a main event star? He hasn't main evented a pay-per-view. They put him on TV in some of these matches with fucking interchangeable numerically numbered job guys. I'm sorry, but yes, he's correct about the WWE. They're not making any stars anymore, and these guys are not making any. They're stars to the same people that they were stars to at the start of the program. Who has come into AEW in the last year and a half and is somehow worlds better off than they were before, except that they're just on television to begin with, whereas they weren't before?
Well, again, a year and a half ago, a little bit more than that, is the debut of AEW. So let's think about the guys who were never on national TV before. Darby Allin, Jungle Boy, Adam Page, Orange Cassidy. Who else am I forgetting? Which has to be multiple. I mean, the Young Bucks they were on TNA. Omega, never on national TV before.
Okay, who of those people that you named, Darby Allin may be the only one, because they've done nothing with Jungle Boy. Page is drifting aimlessly.
Page and Jungle Boy both went backwards. Both of them at different times seemed like on the cusp of, oh wow, Jungle Boy's getting a match with Jericho. They're going to do something with him and the fans are reacting to him. And then all of a sudden, he's just a non-entity, and Adam Page, we've talked about his problems.
So, out of that bunch, Darby Allin may be the best off, even with the bad booking, because he's got the unique physical charisma, and people are intrigued by him and like him, and the way he throws himself into shit. So whatever positive addition to his fame or personality that he's had since they've been on television is all his work. The booking has done nothing for anybody. So I'm not saying that they're not making stars and WWE is. I'm saying neither one of these companies is making any stars. They're just making the people that their fan base liked already more easy to see. But the booking doesn't transform them to these mega celebrities. They're going to cheer for them because they like them anyway.
All right. Well, with that, I promised you that would be the last one. I can keep going, but that will be the sound of the listeners wanting more. The drive-thru is closed. I screwed that up. So now I overcompensate with too many notes. You can hear us on the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts this Saturday, wherever you find your favorite podcast, for the Blood and Guts review.
Oh, I can't wait. They probably got some guts to do this, but I bet we won't see a lot of blood.
If any major organs are left over, you can hear about them Tuesday on the drive-thru, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget, you can go through classic episodes of the Drive Thru and the Experience from the beginning in 2013 up to right now. We're uploading episodes from 2016, including a 2-part interview, Jim Cornette and Bruce Pritchard. Hear it today by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/Cornette. For only $5 a month, you get access to the archives with episodes added each and every week. Patreon.com/Cornette. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Bryan Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com. Available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget about the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette for full episodes, clips of episodes, and omnibus collections, all with the very popular Travis Heckel artwork. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com. What am I saying this time?
Well, we're working on it. Actually, besides filling the action figure orders, hopefully in June, we will be opening up again for more sales with a brand new website. TBA.
You heard it here first. TBA at jimcornette.com. The Drive-Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com. But until Friday on The Experience, and every day on Twitter, and of course next week here on The Drive-Thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Bryan Last. Tally-ho!